Chapter 143. Members of the Order gather. Silence settled over the chamber like a spell. The air crackled with tension, and for a moment it was so still you could hear a pin drop. Then someone arrived. Severus Snape's sharp gaze flicked to the opposite wall, where a curious device hung, a mirror almost, but not quite. Unlike an ordinary looking glass, this one showed nothing of the room behind him. Instead, the polished glass swirled with dark, indistinct shapes, shadowy figures drifting just out of focus. Moody's handiwork, Snape guessed, a modified vigilance mirror that remained dormant on ordinary days but came alive whenever a wizard approached. Albus Dumbledore, standing nearby, tilted his head and studied the apparition with mild interest. "Classic design," he murmured. "When those silhouettes reveal the whites of their eyes, it usually means danger is near." He shot a sideways glance at Moody. "Though I must say, I don't relish watching it 24 hours a day as you do, Alastor." Moody, legendarily nicknamed Mad Eye, grunted in reply, his magical eye swiveling beneath his hood. Snape offered a faint smirk. He wasn't about to admit he shared Moody's paranoia. "As the clock ticks," Snape said, checking the time on his pocket watch, "we'd best open the door." With that, he strode across the room and swept open the heavy hatch. Instantly, the soft, inward-curving walls revealed a crowded meeting chamber. Order members spilled inside, witches and wizards in hushed conversation, their robes whispering over the smooth stone floor. At the far edge of the room, Moody planted himself, staff in hand, ever watchful. Dumbledore's eyes glinted. "Welcome, everyone. Let's begin." And with that, the long-awaited Council of the Order of the Phoenix was finally underway. Alastor, Mad Eye, Moody was one of the original members of the Order of the Phoenix, a longtime friend of Albus Dumbledore, and a legendary Auror in the wizarding world. His long gray hair framed a face so deeply scarred that every inch seemed marked by battle. A vicious blow from Evan Rosier had torn away part of his nose, leaving a jagged void among the remnants of burned and twisted flesh. His mouth sat in a permanent, crooked grimace, and most unsettling of all was his magical eye. An orb the size of a silver dollar, glowing a bright, unearthly blue. That eye could pierce invisibility cloaks, see through walls and doors, and even glimpse the back of Moody's own head, earning him the nickname Mad Eye Moody throughout the magical community. A wooden prosthetic leg replaced one he'd lost in the line of duty, announcing his arrival with each heavy, thudding step. As an Auror, he'd captured more than half the inmates in Azkaban, a record that left him with nearly as many enemies as accolades. Now retired with old age creeping in, Moody's suspicion had only grown sharper. He trusted no one, convinced that a dark wizard lurked around every corner. This evening, his magical eye roved the room with the hunger of a ravenous hyena, so vigilant even Dumbledore's presence could not entirely calm him. Daedalus Diggle was the first to swagger into Snape's sitting room, leaning as heavily as ever on Moody's arm. Only someone as exuberant as Diggle could bound through a wizard's front door as if it were a holiday fete. "Oh, my first time in Snape's house," he crowed in that unmistakably high-pitched voice of his, so loud that in his excitement his battered top hat tumbled to the floor. "Hurry up," grumbled the enormous pocket watch strapped beneath his sleeve, its tinny voice chiding him for dawdling. "There's no need to rush," replied a square-jawed wizard at Diggle's side. Sturgis Podmore, the Order's straw-haired founding member, smiled wryly. On Dumbledore's right stood the only witch among them, Hestia Jones, whose rosy cheeks and sleek black hair were reminiscent of Snape's own, minus the perpetual grease. And finally there was Kingsley Shacklebolt, the newest recruit to the Order of the Phoenix. A tall, dark-skinned Auror from the Ministry of Magic, he carried himself with calm authority, bald, with a single gold hoop in one ear. Snape, who had been observing the arrivals in silence, fixed his sharp gaze on this unfamiliar face. Dumbledore, noticing the potions master's curiosity, offered a gentle introduction. "Severus, allow me to present Kingsley Shacklebolt." Severus Snape looked every inch the ruined spy, hair disheveled, robe singed, expression guarded, and yet, when Albus Dumbledore spoke, there was no mistaking his praise. "Outstanding," the headmaster had said. "Steady, cautious." Snape almost scoffed. He'd never heard Dumbledore lavish such accolades on anyone before. And here he was, back at the Order's headquarters alongside the other original members, so close to Voldemort's stronghold that the air still crackled with dark magic. "Severus," Dumbledore began, his voice steady and calm despite the tension in the room. Snape's eyes flicked up to meet the headmaster's. Kingsley Shacklebolt leaned forward from his seat at the long oak table. His tone was low, but it carried unmistakable authority and reassurance. "You weren't at the battle we'd planned," Kingsley said, "but you did confront Lord Voldemort himself and lived to escape. Tell us exactly what happened. How did you distract him? How did you slip away? If he's as weakened as you imply, we might still intercept him before he recovers." Snape stiffened at the reminder that he'd cheated death twice over. Dumbledore's keen eyes softened. "Your talent and your nerve could provide the opening we need," he added quietly. "I, for one, would like nothing better than to test my own wand against you-know-who again." From the back of the chamber, Mad-Eye Moody's rasping laugh cracked the tension like a whip. "Aye, my wand's been itching for a skirmish with that git," he croaked, one magical eye swiveling excitedly behind its battered goggles. A deliberate cough from Dumbledore brought the room to silence. Every head turned toward the headmaster, waiting for him to speak. The future of the mission, perhaps of the entire Wizarding War, hinged on Snape's next words. Chapter 23, The True Enemy. The room fell silent under Dumbledore's stern gaze. "Voldemort has not, indeed has never truly resurrected," the headmaster began. "He chose instead to remain a vessel for the betrayer in his eyes, summoning his Death Eaters not out of loyalty, but as mere expendable pawns. He even refrained from harming any muggle or wizard outside their ranks." A murmur rippled through the gathered Aurors and Order members. They understood Dumbledore's unspoken fear. He would not risk sacrificing his people for a hollow victory. "Which explains how Severus managed to slip away," Moody growled, his magical eyes spinning wildly. "Voldemort doesn't have enough consumables to unleash his full strength. He's holding back." "Sacrifices?" Moody added, voice low and dangerous. "I've been ready for that since my Auror days. Albus, you're getting a bit long in the tooth." Before Dumbledore could reply, a chill swept the room as Voldemort's voice echoed, strained, distant, yet unmistakably his. "May I speak?" Heads turned. Even Severus Snape stiffened. "I was called back to negotiate," Voldemort continued. "Let us not obsess over capturing me. We've tried for centuries. My immortality is bound by ancient enchantments that, until now, even Albus could not circumvent. Our true focus must be elsewhere." A hush fell. "A venomous serpent skulks within Hogwarts," Voldemort said. "I named it the Children's Spy. Remove it, and you'll cut off my eyes and ears in the school." Snape's lips curled into a sneer. "You speak of a snake as if it's a greater threat than the Dark Lord himself." Voldemort's reply was a soft hiss. "It observes when I cannot. It reports what I must know. Destroy that serpent, and then we can consider negotiations." Dumbledore's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Lightning flickered behind the tall windows, as though the storm outside echoed the turmoil within. He exchanged glances with Moody, Snape, and the assembled Aurors. All battle, Dumbledore realized, lay not in hunting Voldemort himself, but in rooting out this hidden spy among their children. Only then could they hope to turn the tide of war. Over the next 10 minutes, Snape coldly recounted his encounters with Voldemort and outlined every message he'd exchanged with Dumbledore. "Aside from the 2 Caro siblings, there are several unidentified faces among the dead," he noted, his tone stiff as ice. Moody's hand clenched around his wand. He fixed Dumbledore with a dark glare. "And Albus," he growled, "Draco Malfoy remains a prime suspect in my book. Don't tell me you trust him, because I hear Potter does. Are we really going to forget the last time you and the boy who lived placed your faith in someone unflinchingly? Look where that got us." He sneered, letting the accusation hang in the air. Snape's expression didn't change, but his eyes gleamed sharper than ever. "I will keep my own counsel, Alastair," he replied in a low voice. Chapter 144, Riddle's Identity. "Peter Pettigrew," Dumbledore announced. "He's a sworn member of the Order of the Phoenix, from a spotless, respectable family, and sorted into Gryffindor no less, a house almost free of dark wizards. Now consider Draco Malfoy. His very name is bound up with the Death Eaters, and the Sorting Hat plopped him straight into Slytherin. He's never shown a shred of remorse." Moody snorted. "Rotten apples are still rotten apples. If you think the Malfoys can change, I have 2 words for you. Keep dreaming. Their veins run cold with betrayal. Enough, Alastor, Dumbledore interrupted. Moody held up his hand. Draco's out of the question. Besides, his father slipped me something, one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, a linchpin of his immortality. That's a crime too grave to forgive. Even if Draco were to kill Harry, or me, it wouldn't undo Lucius's treachery. Honestly, I already know who the real culprit is. Dumbledore paused, regard growing solemn, then inhaled and said quietly, Tom Riddle. Snape rolled his eyes. You and Riddle were setting a trap for Voldemort. What are you talking about? Moody's gaze flicked from Snape to Dumbledore. And what does any of this have to do with the Defense Against the Dark Arts post? Is he really your son? Digger demanded, his voice sharp. The rumor that Tom Riddle was Albus Dumbledore's child had originated with him. And who's the mother? Sturgis rubbed his square jaw thoughtfully. I'm starting to think it might be Professor McGonagall. A sudden flush heated Hestia's cheeks. She, the Scarlet Witch, had been born in this very room. Before anyone could react, Moody cut in. Hold on, Kingsley, you'd best step outside for a moment. He glared at the newcomer. In Moody's eyes, Kingsley Shacklebolt was still untested, far less reliable than the others. As for why Severus Snape already knew, Moody wasn't surprised. To him, Snape had been an Order agent or a Death Eater spy ever since his school days. Skill-wise, he saw Snape as Albus's equal. Dumbledore offered a wry smile. I'm afraid we won't untangle this quickly. He drew his wand, murmuring a complex incantation. Blue sparks curled along the length of the wood. Then, with a hissing rush like a pressure cooker releasing steam, the cramped sitting room expanded. The sofa stretched out impossibly long, and the bookcase, which had formed an entire wall just moments ago, now looked absurdly small in the suddenly vast chamber. A ripple of amused approval passed through the assembled wizards. Excellent, an absolutely flawless extension charm. Severus Snape bristled. But this is my home, he protested, voice taut with anger. This house held more than the first shards of his childhood pain. Before his father's business failed and his mother's magic was exposed, their lives here had known happiness. It was also where Lily had come to visit after he'd enrolled at Hogwarts, every corner steeped in the brighter memories he so rarely allowed himself to recall. Dumbledore gave him a reassuring smile. Fear not, Severus. In 2 hours the sitting room will revert exactly to its original dimensions. He turned to Kingsley, who was lingering near the threshold. And you, my dear friend, needn't linger outside. Please, come in. With a casual flick of his wand, the mismatched sofas slid smoothly into place around the fireplace, and the rickety side table expanded itself into an elegant, wide surface draped in tartan cloth. Instantly, several crystal sherry glasses appeared, each brimmed with a rich amber liquid. Alastor Moody's grizzled face broke into a rare grin as he lifted one of the glasses in a salute. Ah, you remembered how I like it. He took a long sip, eyes twinkling. I never accept a stranger's drink, yet here I am. Kingsley cast a sly glance at the sherry. And I'm not one for high-proof spirits. Moody let out a hearty chuckle. I knew that look. Don't worry, Kingsley. It's just sherry. Sit down, relax, and let's continue our discussion. He reached for a curiously curved wine bottle and held it up well, grin. All thanks to this. Hestia waved him off, though a playful light danced in her eyes. I'll let it slide this time. But really, as a lady, getting drunk before a table full of gentlemen isn't exactly proper. Indeed, Dumbledore agreed, flicking his wand. The amber sherry in Hestia's glass shimmered and then, with a small pop of magic, turned into a tall goblet of iced pumpkin juice. There we are. That's more like it. Hestia took a grateful sip, delight spreading across her face. I haven't tasted this since I left Hogwarts. Dumbledore smiled. In that case, you must let our dear Hagrid share his special pumpkin-growing secrets with you. On cue, Professor Snape reappeared from upstairs bearing several platters of steaming dishes. Moody, unable to resist, lifted a plate piled with sausages, sniffed them eagerly, then plunged a small knife into one end and bit right in. His grizzled eyebrows rose in surprise at the flavor. For the next 10 minutes, the firelit dining room filled with the clatter of cutlery and contented murmurs as everyone tucked in. Hestia sipped her pumpkin juice between bites of hearty fare, and even Moody paused now and then to compliment the meal's rich, smoky aroma. By the time the last sausage was gone, the table was strewn with empty plates, and each guest was pleasantly, undeniably full. Now, let's talk about who Tom Riddle really is. Alastor Moody fished a grimy handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his mouth. Instead of resorting to a simple cleaning charm like Scourgify or Humping Sweep, the Auror, former Auror, insisted on doing things the old-fashioned way whenever he could. First things first, Whirling Sweep, Moody barked. Digory Delacour raised his wand in an elegant arc. A swirl of magic sucked most of the grease from Moody's handkerchief, which was left smoldering in his palm. Thanks, Digory, Moody drawled, his one good eye twinkling with mischief. You know, if you hadn't been right beside me, my personal rock of assurance, I might have nearly jumped out of my boots when that wand appeared. Or you'd have passed out, Digory teased, hopping with mock concern. Moody's grin turned feral. Nope, Crucio, he said in a low, ominous growl. Though the Ministry of Magic drags its feet on promotions and pay raises, at least they trust me with the unforgivable curses. He jabbed a finger into the air, eyes blazing. Why? Because they know, damn well know, that I'm the only sane one in this business. I've never been a lunatic, and everyone else's guilt is written all over their faces. Why couldn't I stay vigilant, or even strike when I needed to? Arthur burst out. Relax, someone replied. Everything's under control now. Arthur's just been appointed head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Another chimed in. We're all set. Alastor Moody let out a triumphant belch. Albus, you're finally sober, he slurred. Before Moody could say more, Digger clapped a hand over his mouth. He's not drunk, Digger insisted. If anything, he's the clearest head in the room. Moody's eyes twinkled. I make mistakes too, he admitted. Albus Dumbledore raised a calming hand. Now, let me explain Riddle's true identity. He paused to gather everyone's attention. You may recognize the name, but I doubt any of you have connected the dots. He allowed a moment for the revelation to sink in. Tom Riddle is not just another name in the archives. He is a fragment of Voldemort himself, a younger incarnation fragment of the Dark Lord's soul. More importantly, he is our most powerful weapon against the Voldemort who walks among us today. Without him, our plan cannot succeed. The room fell deathly silent. Every pair of eyes fixed on Severus Snape, who sat quietly munching on a piece of stale bread, his gaze fixed on the table. Chapter 145, Harry's Reverie. Voldemort has become little more than a horror story to today's children, but to those who served in the Order of the Phoenix, he remains an ever-present nightmare. Picture this. You leave work at the Ministry in high spirits, anticipating the hearty meal your gentle wife will prepare, looking forward to the sound of your spirited daughter begging for another bedtime tale. Then you round the corner and see it. The dark mark hovering above your front door. In that instant, you know exactly what awaits inside, only death and destruction. Such tragedies rarely befall an ordinary ministry clerk. Voldemort's followers don't slaughter random wizards, but to an order member, it's as commonplace as breathing. During the First Wizarding War, they watched friends, spouses, even their own children fall one by one. And now, when Dumbledore insists that the boy Harry, who harbors a fragment of Voldemort's soul, is part of their cause, they recoil in disbelief. What about justice for all we've lost? They demand. We don't want a clever compromise or a half measure. Voices rise in unison around the table. We're ready to lay down our lives to end him. We don't need any so-called best strategy. We need him dead. A fierce determination flares in every set jaw. Count me in, someone mutters. And in that silent vow, they stand united once more. I think I'm done with the Order of the Phoenix, Kingsley Shacklebolt announced, staring across the table at Tom Riddle. I can't stomach working alongside a man as corrupt as you. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Apart from Severus Snape, every member leaned forward, eager to speak. Albus Dumbledore simply sighed. Your feelings are understandable, but they don't change our mission. Mad-Eye Moody slammed his fist on the desk. Understandable or not, it makes no difference to me. If he truly is innocent, I'll be the one to kill him once Voldemort is defeated, and then I'll end my own life. Hestia Caldwell, whose sister had fallen to the Death Eaters, spoke next. Her voice was icy. How can any of us trust someone whose hands are so stained already? All eyes turned to Snape. Sturgis Podmore, square jaw clenched, finally spoke up. And you, Snape, what say you about Riddle's place here? Severus Snape leaned back, a cold smile playing on his lips. My opinion? Tom Riddle's presence in the Order hardly alters the stakes. Voldemort's defeat always hinged on Harry Potter. The Dark Lord needs to slay Harry with his own hands to be finished. No tricks, no substitutes. With Riddle back in play, Harry doesn't have to die for Voldemort's end. He paused, his black robes rustling as he let his wand idly caress the edge of the table. So if anyone here suggests sacrificing the boy, they'll have to get through me first. A tense silence followed. Snape's expression remained unreadable, but everyone knew the truth behind his words. Voldemort had killed Lily Potter, and for Snape, no price was too high to pay for her memory. Severus Snape rose from his chair, the shadows under his eyes making him appear even more gaunt. Riddle never hesitated to eliminate anyone connected to Voldemort. No one, not even himself. He would have been willing to team up with Sirius Black, irritating as Sirius can be, but once he discovered that Harry was one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, Riddle realized he didn't need to sacrifice the boy's life to defeat the Dark Lord. He backed off immediately. A heavy silence fell over the war room. They could accept giving their own lives for the cause, but Harry's? Alastor, Mad-Eye Moody, slammed a tarnished goblet onto the table. The clatter echoed through the hushed chamber. Fine, he barked. Then explain why you believe Tom Riddle is our spy, and that you two set this whole thing up as a trap for Voldemort. He drained the wine in one steady gulp. The question served him two purposes. Moody hoped the details might reveal a way to extend his own years, maybe even approach nearly headless Nick's strange kind of immortality. And, more gently, he needed absolute certainty that this plan would finally finish off Voldemort. They all knew his one true fear was failing to stop the Dark Lord. At the head of the table, Albus Dumbledore leaned forward, his calm blue eyes meeting Moody's. As you know, he said softly, Voldemort's defeat depends entirely on his resurrection. If he remains incorporeal, then not even Tom Riddle, his only real adversary, can harm him. Luring Voldemort back into a body is our sole chance to destroy him. Moody's magical eye whirled, then fixed on Dumbledore. A crooked grin cracked across his weathered face. You know, I've been wondering about Rita Skeeter's latest. This bit about you carrying on with the Dark Lord himself. I'm beginning to doubt she got it right. A ripple of nervous chuckles spread around the table. Moody's grin tightened until it looked more like a grimace, deep lines cutting across his leathery skin. Under the flickering lamplight, his face seemed almost monstrous, proof perhaps that even the hardest warriors carry shadows of doubt when the stakes are so high. Voldemort couldn't truly hate you. After all, you'd never shown him any real enmity. Hestia sat off to one side, her eyes bright with that spectator's delight expression, as if she were watching juicy gossip unfold before her. In her mind, countless whispered tales of love and rage between Voldemort and the White Wizard swirled together, but the heart of the matter was far simpler, the peace Voldemort claimed to pursue. Dumbledore gave a resigned shrug. To the wider world, he was the greatest White Wizard alive. But when it came to squabbling with these ancient adversaries, what was the use of words? If Voldemort's promises held any truth, they would only have to wait for his resurrection, and let Riddle finish his dark work. With a languid flourish, Professor Digg removed his hat and brushed off a speck of imaginary dust, as though closing the conversation once and for all. Meanwhile, in the silent corridors of Hogwarts, Harry Potter slept on, a small smile playing at his lips. The semester was over, and a hush, heavy and pure as fresh-fallen snow, blanketed the castle. Rather than feeling restless, Harry felt an unexpected peace settle over him. He drifted back into dreams of afternoons spent strolling hand-in-hand with Ginny by the Black Lake, of soaring together across the Quidditch pitch with no one to interrupt them. For the first time in a long while, the world beyond exams and dark prophecies felt pleasantly, and, for now, perfectly, safe. Draco and the others had been discreet enough to arrange separate quarters for the couples staying behind at Hogwarts over Christmas. Pansy had elected to remain as well, and Draco wasn't exactly flying solo, so once they dealt with Ron, the entire holiday break would be theirs, Harry's and Ginny's, alone. The plan was simple, send Ron off with Percy and the rest for the family reunion. After all, it was Christmas. At last, the morning of Christmas Day arrived. A crisp chill of the air, and the castle grounds lay blanketed in fresh snow. In the boys' dormitory, only Harry and Ron remained asleep when Ginny slipped in at sunrise, perfectly dressed and carrying two neatly wrapped packages. "Wake up," she called cheerfully, yanking the curtains open and bathing the room in bright winter light. "Ginny, can't you come back later?" Ron grumbled, covering his eyes against the glare. "I'm a free woman," she announced, stepping onto Harry's bed and ruffling his unruly hair as if no one else existed. "I can come whenever I like." Harry, now fully awake, sat up and eyed the small parcel Ginny handed him. "What's this?" Ginny beamed. "Your Christmas present." "Ginny, this is the boys' dormitory," Ron blurted the moment he saw her strolling in as if she owned the place. He gave her a half-amused, half-annoyed look. "Is there some rule against girls entering?" Ginny paid his protest no mind. Reaching into her satchel, she produced a small, neatly wrapped box and flung it toward him. "Here, your Christmas present." Ron caught it with a frown, cradling the gift as if it might bite. Ginny watched him coolly. Over the years, she'd grown entirely immune to her brother's sour remarks. In her mind, he was simply jealous. She'd wager her prized firebolt that if Ron ever found himself a girlfriend, she'd be even more merciless than Ginny herself. After all, she knew exactly how he ticked. Chapter 146, Traces of Moon City. Ron stood motionless, staring at his sister as if she'd sprouted dragon wings. He still wasn't sure how Ginny had managed to rope him into this, pretending to be annoyed by her mystery gift, only to catch her and Harry in the midst of affectionate teasing. He tore open the package in his hands, eager to see what she'd given him. Inside lay a pair of red leather gloves. They looked sturdy, a touch rough at the seams, but not bad. Ron ran a finger along the cuff. He said, part disgusted, part delighted. His grin froze mid-word when he noticed Harry holding out an identical pair. Same shade of crimson, same cut, but Harry's gloves were impossibly smooth and finely stitched, clearly far superior in quality. Ginny kicked off her shoes and stretched across Harry's four-poster bed. "You know what they say," she purred. "Practice makes perfect." Her eyes sparkled with devilish amusement. Ron's jaw dropped. "You made me practice?" Before he could protest, Hedwig swept into the room, a tiny package clasped in her beak. She swooped down beside Harry and gave his ear a gentle nibble, a greeting far more precious than any trinket. "You little show-off," Harry murmured, laughing as he freed the parcel. Inside was a single wooden toothpick and a brief note in Petunia Dursley's cramped handwriting. The message read, "Does this engagement mean you won't have to come back to our house ever again?" Ginny blinked. Did Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon even know about our announcement? Harry slipped the gloves onto his hands and flexed his fingers. "Apparently they do now," he said with a grin. Then, raising his eyebrows at Ron's still flabbergasted expression, he added, "Ready to start practice, Weasley?" Ron swallowed hard, tempered fury and reluctant amusement warring on his face. "Fine," he growled, "but only if you promise to let me win once in a while." Ginny and Harry exchanged conspiratorial smiles as the three of them prepared to spar, gloves at the ready, rivalry rekindled, and the Dursleys' question lingering in the air like a distant thunderclap. Harry frowned as Ginny's square face turned bright pink. "I think they're right," she blurted, glancing at him. "You can sleep in my room." He gave a short, half-amused shrug and flicked the toothpick he'd been chewing onto the table. Whatever Ginny had started to say after that, he decided, was best left unspoken. Turning back to the pile of presents, Harry noticed something at once. There were far fewer gifts this year than last. He owed the smaller stack entirely to Sirius. Back in October, Sirius had upgraded Harry to VVIP status at the Owl Post Office. As a VVIP, Harry could magically reject any deliveries not on his approved list, and even route unwanted parcels to a secret storage vault Sirius kept in Hogsmeade. Aside from the Weasleys, his friends at Hogwarts, and Sirius himself, everything else had been whisked away to that vault. What remained under the tree was more than worthy of his attention. First came Hagrid's contribution, an enormous satchel of rich, fudgy squares that Harry tucked beside the hearth to soften. Next, Ron pressed a large hardcover book into his hands, Flying with the Chudley Cannons, a collection of anecdotes about Harry's favorite Quidditch team. Then Draco Malfoy produced an elegant silver quill, engraved with the Malfoy crest. Finally, Harry lifted the last package, soft and slightly uneven. Inside lay Mrs. Weasley's latest hand-knit jumper, every stitch as warm as the red and gold yarn she'd used. He grinned. This year, at last, he had a perfectly legitimate reason to wear a Weasley sweater. Harry slipped into the knitted sweater and grinned at Ginny. As she shrugged off her cloak, Harry noticed she was wearing one of Mrs. Weasley's famous jumpers, too, brightly colored, with her initials stitched on the front. "Where are Fred and George?" Harry murmured. Last Christmas, the twins had burst into the dormitory at dawn, red-eyed from laughter, and probably a bit of Flitwick's flaming charm were, and Aunt Petunia had gone through the roof when they showed up in her parlor. According to them, Ginny said with a playful roll of her eyes, Christmas is a time for family reunions. They insisted I tell you to meet them in the Gryffindor common room. And Percy. Well, Percy would probably have been dragged along too, if only by sheer sibling pressure. Ron poked his head out from under the covers with a disgruntled groan. "Family reunion," he says. "I just want to stay here, lie around all day, and play with my presents." "They're waiting for you," Ginny replied gently. "They asked me to remind you to come downstairs." Ron sat up, looking worried. "What about you two?" Ginny shot Harry a conspiratorial look. "This has nothing to do with me," she told Ron. Harry put a calming hand on his cousin's shoulder. "You go on ahead, Ron." Ron's face fell, then he huffed. "Very well, but remember, you're still a first year, Ginny." With a final indignant flap of his blanket, he stomped out of the room. When the footsteps faded, Harry and Ginny exchanged a soft smile. Harry yawned, rubbing his eyes. "I'm still half asleep," he admitted, his voice dry. "Me too," Ginny said, slipping back under the covers. From the bed across the room, something stirred. "This is so exciting," said a sleepy voice. Ryan, a fellow first year they hadn't even noticed waking up. He stretched his arms above his head, eyes shining with morning wonder. Harry and Ginny laughed quietly. Christmas at Hogwarts was just beginning. Ryan clicked his tongue, and in an instant he stood in the grand foyer of Smith Castle. His threadbare pajamas dissolved, replaced by a flowing black wizard's robe embroidered with silver runes. He had come to reclaim the one bathroom in the castle that had always been off limits, the chamber sealed shut whenever George Smith still lived. Passing between twin silver seats bathed in Goobler's fairy fire, Ryan reached the concealed elevator and pressed the button for the lowest sublevel. The rippling metal doors slid open to reveal only a solitary oak door, its surface scarred by time and etched with cryptic symbols. At his side, Jerry the house elf knelt on one knee, clad in brocade finer than any elf should dare to wear. "Master," he intoned softly, "what are your orders? Shall I rouse Miss Nagini to tend to you?" Ryan shook his head. "No, Nagini must hibernate undisturbed for now. What I want is this bathroom restored to its former grandeur. It hardly needs structural repairs, but leaving it as it is feels wrong." Jerry rose, eyes bright with determination. "As you wish, Master." With that, Ryan lifted the worn knocker, pushing open the door on silent hinges. Beyond lay a forgotten space waiting to be reborn. Ryan stretched out his right hand, and silver starlight coalesced around him. Instantly, every detail of the bathroom filled his mind. The twinkling ceiling of stars, pale mist rising from the bronze tub, the cool marble underfoot, and the lifelike rock formations that made the room feel like a hidden grotto. He pictured the tub itself as a natural hot spring, complete with a diving board arcing over one end. In one corner stood a mountain of white towels, folded into the shape of a snow-capped peak. Even the enchanted painting on the wall, its surface rippling like water, came to life in his vision. At that same moment, in the twin Smith castles, identical fortresses standing opposite each other, Ryan's summoned image materialized on the first floor, directly across from the elevator lobby. Colorless ripples shivered through the air, as though stones had disturbed a glassy lake, and within those waves a faint galaxy of stars shimmered. Ryan stepped forward and pressed on an ornately carved oak door. It swung open to reveal the very bathroom he had envisioned. To his right, mounted in a gilded frame, was the painting of jagged rocks standing against an endless gray sea. A blonde mermaid, her hair as white as fresh snow, peeked out of the frame and gave him a playful wave. Before he could respond, the door clicked, shut behind him. "All right, Jerry," Ryan said without turning. "What have you learned about Moon City?" In the blink of an eye, they reappeared in his study. Tall bookshelves lined the walls, and arcane artifacts gleamed under soft lamplight. Jerry bowed and spoke in a calm, measured tone. "Master, something is very wrong at Shelburne Farm, the 1,400-acre estate on the shores of Lake Champlain. Every drop of milk, every fruit and vegetable it produces, has inexplicably vanished." Concern flickered across Ryan's face as he considered the implications. At that moment, thanks to a combination of spells and alchemical devices, the milk, fruits, and vegetables remained perfectly fresh, even though they lay just outside the detection radius of tracer number 134. Jerry leaned forward, voice eager. "All right, tell me about its history." Ryan's eyes lit up with interest. Although this ranch isn't officially part of Moon City, most experts believe it was once an obscure wizarding estate, something of a legend, like a hidden Atlantis. Before wizards claimed it, the property belonged to a Muggle, William Seward Weber, a very successful businessman in the non-magical world. He built the farm around 4 main divisions: a 24-room inn, a non-profit educational center, a cattle ranch, and a vegetable garden. Jerry nodded thoughtfully, absorbing every detail. Chapter 147, Weber Butt. William Seward Weber? Ryan's voice fell to a whisper. Across his skin, faint points of starlight flickered into being. In his silver-white eyes, a vast formation took shape, a magic circle woven from the very strands of the Milky Way. With that circle burning in his gaze, Ryan peered into the third realm, the plane beyond matter and spirit that wizards call destiny. Before him flowed the River of Fate, its currents carrying every thread of the world's past and yet to come. One by one, names surfaced in the luminous tide. William Seward Webb, Annika Minerva Strouth, Elric Gryffindor. When William Seward Webb appeared, it quivered and dissolved, leaving only Webb behind. From that lone name drifted a silken thread, reaching into the river and plucking out a single point of light, Weber Butt. Unlike any ordinary mortal's name, it glowed with a timeless, transcendent brilliance. Around it orbited other legendary names, among them Slytherin, Cadmus Peverell, whose roots reached even deeper into history. Ryan's brow lifted in surprise. Weber Butt. He knew Butt as a commonplace Muggle surname, one once borne by an obscure family of shoemakers. From that modest lineage, however, a wizard had arisen, one whose destiny was now woven among the greatest names of the wizarding world. Long ago, an unnamed wizard left Ireland and made his home across the seas. Generations later, his descendant Webb Butte, along with his older brother Chadwick, still bore the family's emerald green eyes and quick temper. Seeking a new life, their parents loaded the boys aboard a ship bound for Plymouth Colony and set out for adventure in the wild new world. Upon arriving in the fledgling settlement, the Buttes forged a friendship with James Stewart, a nomad whose curiosity about the hidden magical world drew him close to the family. One crisp autumn afternoon, William and Elspeth Butte led Chadwick and young Webb into the nearby forest, hoping to gather rare mushrooms and sniff out game. Suddenly, a creature, its fur matted like wet moss and its fangs glinting in the underbrush, lunged from the shadows. The brothers' screams pierced the air, and by the time help arrived, their parents lay dead and the boys were gravely wounded. Fate intervened when 2 local foragers, William Thayer and his sister, Iseult, chanced upon the devastated clearing. They carried Chadwick and Webb to Iseult's humble hut, where she bound their wounds and tended them through fevered nights. On the 3rd day, bloodied and delirious, James Stewart stumbled into the clearing after searching fruitlessly for the family. Iseult welcomed him in, and together they nursed the Butte boys back to health. In the weeks that followed, a deeper bond formed among the 4. Iseult Thayer and James Stewart, each proud of their secret descent from Salazar Slytherin, found themselves drawn to one another by compassion, wit, and courage. When Webb and Chadwick finally recovered, the couple made them an offer. "Come live with us as our own." Grateful and with no family left, the brothers agreed. Years passed. The household's values of teamwork, ingenuity, and daring inspired the formation of a school, Ilvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, where magical children of all backgrounds could learn and grow. James and Iseult named their house Thunderbird, and their example set the tone for the entire community. But Webb Butte felt Ireland calling him home. In early adulthood, he returned across the Atlantic, determined to revive his ancestral village and plant fresh roots on the shores of Lough Corrib. There he married and raised children who would carry on the Bute name back on Irish soil. Centuries later, one of his distant descendants surfaced in New England, Terry Butt. Though proud of her inheritance, Terry has always sensed a gap in her family tree, an unspoken story winding between European wizards and Native American magic. Some say her mysterious lineage sprang from one of Webb's brief romances with a woman of the Wampanoag, a liaison lost to history, but powerful enough to defy neat genealogical records. Even today, wizards who study Ilvermorny's founding remember how family ties can straddle oceans, cultures, and the fine line between the known and the hidden. It makes sense. Terry is of Indian heritage, after all, Ryan said, realization lighting his eyes. This is incredible. Could Yu Cheng's clues really have been under my nose the whole time? He gratefully accepted the cup of black tea Jerry handed him and took a long, steadying sip to calm his racing thoughts. Lane, who had been quietly piecing together every detail, finally spoke up. William Seward Webb, the American tycoon, is descended from the wizarding Webb-Bute family. But unlike his Irish kin, who kept the Bute name, he dropped it entirely and went by Webb, a name already well known in the North American wizarding world. A distant roll of thunder rumbled outside, but to Ryan it sounded like nothing more than the beating of his own heart. He closed his eyes, letting the magic of the tempest swirl inside him, wrapping around his mind like a spider's web. Wild, half-formed theories drifted through his thoughts, each one slowly converging on the truth, guided by the system's subtle prompt, until, without warning, a crack like thunder split the mental storm. A colossal snake-shaped shadow roared across his inner vision, slamming into his consciousness and shattering his train of thought. Slytherin. Heir, Ryan muttered, eyes snapping open as he frowned. He could force his mind to push through the barrier, but this surge of magic was far too strong. An all-out mental duel would drag on for weeks, perhaps even a month, before it yielded any answers, and Ryan didn't have that kind of time. Shelburne Farm's connection to the mystery was unmistakable. It had long been in the hands of the Bute Thayer descendants. And yet, the everyday supplies that originated there kept turning up in a region so remote it lay beneath the floor of the Atlantic Ocean. Even more puzzling, Ryan's most sophisticated tracking enchantment, Tracer 134, failed to register any trace of human presence. There was only one place on Earth, or off it, where something could remain so utterly concealed: the moon. The United States, after all, was the first nation to set foot on its surface, and its lunar outpost had been cloaked from both Muggle and magical detection. No one in the American wizarding world possessed the resources or the motive to build a secret city on the moon except the Bute Thayer line. In the United States, magical society was notoriously insular. Relations between witches, wizards, and nomads were rigorously policed, and marriage to a non-magical person was virtually unheard of. Yet Iseult Thayer had shattered every precedent when she wed James Stewart, the only Muggle ever known to craft wands. Under their partnership, the Thayer family perfected the art of creating magical implements for non-wizards, and quite possibly guided the course of American science and technology. Given that legacy, there could be no doubt who founded the hidden colony known as Moon City. It was the work of Iseult Thayer's descendants, the Bute family, who alone had the skill, the secrecy, and the ambition to settle another world. Wizards in the United States have always kept their distance from nomade society, much like the old Native American tribes once did with settlers. That same impulse explains the link between Atlantis and Moon City. Nearly every member is a graduate of Ilvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and one among them even claims direct descent from Ilvermorny's founder. Unfortunately, Terry almost certainly has no idea that Moon City exists. Ryan realized this as he pieced together the family history. Terry's branch of the Bute clan was likely left behind in England by Weber Bute long ago, while the American Butes represent a separate line. In the original timeline, Terry took part in the final battle at Hogwarts, but beyond that, his family has kept themselves firmly out of the limelight. They're the kind of Ravenclaws who prefer dusty tomes to social gatherings, content to live quietly in their own world. If Terry or his parents had ever learned of Moon City, they'd have abandoned Ilvermorny in a heartbeat and moved there without looking back. Still, that won't stop Ryan from finding a way in. Through Shelburne Farm, he's confident he can reach Moon City whenever he chooses. He turned away from the window, scanning the scattered notes on his desk. "Are there any more leads?" he asked, his tone flat with impatience. After cracking the fiendish puzzle he'd set for himself, Ryan turned his attention to locating other wizarding enclaves, places like the hidden Moon City. He consulted Jerry, his most trusted aide. "Master," Jerry began, eyes fixed on the shimmering runes displayed in midair, "there's only one site left. Every other lead was eliminated by the tracking spells and alchemical probes you devised." Ryan frowned, studying the floating coordinates. "And the material world readings?" "All of them lie within territories already known to host wizards," Jerry confirmed. "No new locations turned up." Satisfied they'd exhausted every trail, Ryan leaned back. His self-imposed quest had been ruthless, but he refused to stop until he'd uncovered every hidden community of magic users. Across the ocean at Hogwarts, the Gryffindor common room suddenly felt like a gladiator's arena, and Ron Weasley was entirely unprepared for the spectacle unfolding around him. He'd expected to see Fred or George joking at the couch, but instead a half-dozen statuesque witches stood in a tight semicircle, filling the fire-lit space with their expectant gazes. "You're Ron Weasley?" asked the tallest among them, her brows raised in challenge. Before he could answer, another stepped forward, palm outstretched. "Let me see how strong you are." Her companion pressed a hand against Ron's forearm. "Not bad, you've got real muscle." A third witch, eyes sparkling with curiosity, leaned in. "Tell us about Harry Potter. Who is he, really?" Ron's mouth went dry. He sank onto the armchair, panic bubbling in his chest. Tears welled in his eyes as he flung his arms out in protest. "When did I ever say I wanted to get married?" he blurted, voice cracking. Silence fell. The witches exchanged glances, some amused, some intrigued, while Ron's heart thundered in his ears. He'd been expecting pranks and laughter. Not this. Ceremonial scrutiny. And now all he could think was, if they were after information on Harry, he was in far deeper trouble than he'd ever imagined. Chapter 148, The Failed Journey to Egypt. Married in the second year? Ron stared in disbelief. At first, he imagined some remote village in India. After all, a second grader is only 7 years old, and forcing a child that young into marriage is unthinkable. But Hogwarts' second year isn't 7, it's 12. Witch and wizarding families often arrange engagements at that age, so Ron's initial shock turned into a shrug of acceptance. He'd simply misheard. They were talking about a betrothal, not a wedding. What he did not anticipate was Fred and George's secret enlistment of an elite circle of powerful witches. Such formidable magic users were virtually unheard of at Hogwarts. After one impossible obstacle after another in their escape from the Gryffindor common room, Ron finally burst into the corridor, only to freeze when he saw 2 scorched red heads bobbing ahead of him. "I'll kill you!" He bellowed and sprinted toward the tousled twin of the pair. Surely that was Fred with his trademark wild hair. His fist connected where he expected a hard skull, but instead his knuckles sank into something unnervingly soft. Then crack! A scorching wave of energy blasted across his cheeks. It wasn't a mundane backhand. It was like a tiny magical explosion. Ron staggered backward, hand to his reddened face, as the twins exchanged smug grins. He'd walked straight into their latest prank, and their most explosive one yet. Ron rubbed his cheek, relieved to find it unburned. Blinking against the haze of smoke and ash, he stared down at the wreckage littering the corridor, spent fireworks, singed tapestries, and at the heart of it all, a small, charred crater. In its center lay a single card. He picked it up and read the familiar scrawl. "Dear Ron, we know you're still flying solo, surrounded by friends, yet somehow single. Now, that's not because you lack, well, let's say, charm. You simply have exquisite taste. Your secret portrait of Aunt Muriel under your pillow certainly proves it. After some serious legwork, we've recruited 30 lovely young ladies who've agreed to volunteer as your suitors. Consider this a little push in the right direction. Love you both, Fred and George." Ron let out a frustrated snort. Bastards! Filchers would be proud of them. A shriek tore down the corridor behind him. He spun around to see a wizard emerge, leaning against the wall, his once red hair now a massive black and red afro, singed and smoking. He wiped soot from his face and glared back at Ron as though daring him to look away. Staggering past him, Ron made for the portrait hole. 20 minutes later, he burst into the Gryffindor dormitory, cheeks still dusty, hair still towering in that ridiculous afro, and both hands clutching at it in panic. "Ginny, help me. Take this infernal thing off my head," he gasped. Ginny, curled up on Harry's bed, sat up and yawned. Casually brushing ash from her sleeve, she regarded him with amused eyes. "Oh, Ron," she said brightly. "Don't you already know? This is Fred and George's latest product." Ron froze. "They did this to me?" She nodded, a triumphant smile tugging at her lips. "Their newest invention. And, believe it or not, they also lined up those 30 young ladies to meet you. So go on, introduce yourself. You might find you like the attention." Defeated and oddly intrigued, Ron sank down on his trunk, steeling himself to face whatever the twins had in store next. Ginny nudged Harry's shoulder until he stirred. "Harry, look." He bolted upright in bed, eyes bleary, hair sticking out in every direction. "Ron, what did you do to my hair?" Ron, already half-dressed, shot him a tired glare. His own mop was equally bedraggled. He ran a frustrated hand through it and muttered, "Forget the hair. We've got a much bigger problem." "What now?" Harry swung his legs over the side of the bed. "Where are our dates?" Ron's voice was tense. Harry blinked. "You mean you didn't see them?" Ginny rose from the foot of Harry's bed, her expression anxious. "What about Percy? He was here too." Ron shook his head. No sign of him either. "They should still be in the common room," Harry said, frowning. "Why would they leave?" Ron sagged into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "After what Fred and George pulled last night, I'm not setting foot in the Gryffindor common room on the 8th floor again. No way." Harry and Ginny exchanged a look. "That was a prank?" Harry asked, though he already knew the answer. "Prank?" Ron scoffed. "More like a circus. Fred went way too far." "Those girls came here for a proper blind date," Harry said, "and he turned it into chaos." Ginny's cheeks were still pink with embarrassment. "So, what are we going to do now?" Ron exhaled. "First, we find out where our dates and Percy went. Then we find Fred and George. They owe us some serious explanations." Harry nodded. "Agreed. Let's get going." Together, they hurried from the dormitory, determined to track down their missing friends, and finally uncover what really happened in the common room last night. Harry, Ron, and Ginny had barely set foot on the courtyard lawn before a gaggle of giggling, fifth-year girls descended on them. Ron yelped as two of them gave his rear an enthusiastic squeeze. "Oi, I'm the one who got wounded in the throat. Whose bright idea was it to swarm me like that?" Harry laughed, slinging an arm around his friend's shoulders. "Looks like you're a hit with the ladies, mate." Ron stamped his foot, mock outraged. "Popular? If I'd been any less fit, I'd have lost my dignity, and maybe even my first kiss." Ginny slipped free of the girl's excited chatter and turned to Harry, breathless. He drew her into a gentle hug, deliberately tapping into a little of her leftover adrenaline to calm her nerves. "Well," he said, "if this is Hogwarts' way of saying welcome back, I'll take it." Ron shot a glare at Harry. "It's not just Harry Potter's triumphant return, you know. I'm Arthur Weasley's son, Fred and George's little brother. Where's my fanfare?" Harry grinned. "Relax, Ron. There's more than enough attention to go around." A reluctant grin crept onto Ron's face, but before anyone could say more, Ginny's expression turned distant. She drew in a sharp breath and whispered, "Something's off." Harry and Ron exchanged anxious looks as Ginny's eyes fixed on the darkening sky beyond the castle walls, her sudden stillness cutting through the girls' excited chatter like a knife. "Fred and George?" Ron rubbed the back of his neck. "I thought they were up in the Gryffindor dormitory. I didn't dare go in to check." "No," Ginny said, shaking her head. "I mean Fred, George, and Percy." Harry and Ron exchanged confused looks. Ron had been planning to sneak off, don Harry's invisibility cloak, and wait by the fat lady's portrait on the 8th floor, just to catch the twins red-handed. If Fred and George weren't even here, all his scheming would be for nothing. Ginny tapped her chin thoughtfully. "First, they weren't wearing their Weasley sweaters. You know how Fred and George never leave without theirs." Harry and Ron fell silent. "Second," Ginny went on, "Percy was carrying a ton of stuff. When I asked what it was, Fred and George said it was just snow." She frowned. "But if it really was snow, there would have been water stains on the floor. And you couldn't mistake them for two people. The outline was all wrong. It was the shape of one person. So, Harry said slowly, there's only one explanation. They've gone back, Ginny finished. Ron's scream cut the evening air like a curse. A sudden crackle and pop erupted in his left pocket, and he jerked back, eyes wide. Scabbers, he cried, plunging a frantic hand inside. Moments later, he pulled out his rat, who sat blinking in a puff of soot. The poor creature's once golden fur was now a tangled black mess, but otherwise unhurt. Ron exhaled, scooping Scabbers up and smoothing down his singed whiskers. You gave me a fright, little mate, he murmured, planting a relieved kiss on the rat's head. Harry knelt to examine the source of the racket. On the floor lay a scorched scrawl, pea of parchment. Was this your exploding dummy? He asked, brow raised. Ron straightened, gingerly lifting the charred paper. At first it looked blank, but as they watched, the letters flickered from gray ash into bright emerald script. Then the message rearranged itself in neat handwriting. Dear Ron, Ginny, and Harry, by now you've probably realized we're no longer at Hogwarts. Tell us, when did it finally click? Was it that late-night run-in with the fat lady? Hilarious! Oh, and guess what? Percy and we are off to Egypt to visit Bill's in-laws. We did consider inviting you, but George and I vetoed it. Don't thank us, it's for the best. After all, Ron's got a blind date waiting. Yours in mischief, Fred and George. Ginny whistled. Egypt, really? I can't wait to hear Mum's reaction. Harry grinned, tucking the now calm Scabbers into Ron's arms. Only Fred and George would rig a pocket rat to explode into a letter. Ron laughed, relief flooding him. Classic twins, and here I thought they'd forgotten us. He slipped the letter into his robe pocket, this time under careful guard, and fell into step with Harry and Ginny, wondering what other surprises the Weasleys had in store. Ginny's heart sank at the announcement. She was going along with Harry again, this time alongside her favorite twins, Fred and George, and to her dismay, her despised brother Percy. Ron's face twisted in outrage. But we were supposed to go to Egypt, he protested. Chapter 149, Voyage to the Moon. Still keen on traveling? Harry asked with a playful gleam in his eyes. I've got an even better destination in mind. Ron's dread was instantaneous. He should have refused the moment Harry suggested it. Now he found himself submerged in a bucket of milk, technically breathing, but fully immersed in the cool white liquid. It felt as if he'd become one with the milk, a ghostly silhouette trapped in a vessel barely wider than his shoulders. His eyes and mouth were sealed shut by magic, leaving him to rely only on muffled sounds and the slick walls beneath his fingertips. Worst of all, he had no clue how long he'd stay like this. Their destination? The moon, a place so distant even the greatest wizards, Dumbledore or Voldemort included, couldn't reach it by magic alone. On a Nimbus 2001, traveling at light speed, the journey would still take 68 years, unless you could eliminate gravity altogether, which Harry apparently could by using the inside of his own mouth as a portal. Will I starve in here? Ron thought, pressing a hand to his rumbling stomach. Relax, you're not going to starve, Harry's voice chimed inside his head, barely suppressing a laugh. Ron, did you even read the instructions? Ginny's voice, clear, insistent, sounded inside his head. He tried to answer, but found his tongue, lips, even his breath frozen in place. For a moment he felt as if breathing had been nothing more than a habit, a trick of the mind. Listen, you oaf. Ginny's exasperated mental tone cut in. We can hear everything you're thinking. Well, everything you're trying to say out loud. So think the instructions, and think them clearly. Before Ron could swallow his own tongue, Harry's voice chimed in, quiet but urgent. Come on, Ron. Focus on the instructions. Right? Ron thought, deliberately picturing the lines of text in his mind. Almost immediately, another layer of information settled into his head, fragments he'd never consciously seen before. This place, the Moon City, was the creation of the Heir family, direct descendants of Salazar Slytherin and their adopted protégés, the Boots. He could almost picture Draco Malfoy now, chest puffed up with pride. Like the great Muggle wandmaker James Stewart, Heir and Boot had mastered a method to fashion magical tools without wands. This hidden legacy formed the very foundation of the city itself. As the full truth of Moon City's origins sank in, Ron's apprehension gave way to excitement. He drew a steadying breath. Yes, he really could. But the old panic still fluttered in his chest. Ignoring it, he concentrated on the final lines of the mental instructions, determined to unlock whatever secrets lay ahead. When the American wizarding community decided to sever ties with Muggles, they looked skyward for a new home, settling on the moon and raising Moon City according to their own design. Ron sat back, combing through the fascinating details stored in his mind. It wasn't just Moon City. Wizards who had embraced Ilvermorny's ideals were casting their nets worldwide, gathering like-minded folk to their cause. Meanwhile, others had restored the sunken remnants of Atlantis, transforming it into a gleaming underwater metropolis. "Ron, you all right?" Harry's voice cut through Ron's thoughts. The three of them, Harry, Ron, and Ginny, stood in relative silence, but only Ginny could actually hear the stray snippets of information buzzing around Ron's head. Had Ron caught them, he'd have flushed scarlet. "Yeah, I'm fine." Ron blinked and expelled the last thread of mental data, still feeling a little unsettled. He turned to Ginny. "Ginny, you've been awfully quiet. Everything okay?" There was a pause. Then Ginny's soft answer echoed directly in both Harry and Ron's minds. "Nothing. I'm fine." Ron noticed a gentle hesitation in her tone, something oddly reminiscent of the way she'd greeted Harry the very first time he'd visited the burrow. He exchanged a curious look with Harry, wondering what on earth was going through his sister's head. N sank into the cockpit seat and let out a long breath. "I never imagined we'd actually make it to the moon." Ginny leaned forward, her eyes bright. "When Ryan first told me, I thought I was dreaming." Harry grinned. "If I hadn't experienced Atlantis with him, I'd swear he was talking nonsense, just like you do sometimes," he teased Ron, then suddenly froze. "Wait, what?" Ron shot him a glare. "You've been to Atlantis? The legendary underwater city? When on earth did this happen?" Ginny twisted her fingers around her wand, recalling the flickers of Harry's memories she'd glimpsed. "During your summer break, maybe— No, that can't be right. If you'd gone then, Dobby would have known about it." Ron's expression hardened. "So you actually met Ryan last semester?" He sounded wounded. "You lied to me. You said you'd only run into him at the spaceport entrance." Harry held up his hands. "I swear I didn't lie. It's because of the Atlantis Pact. I was bound to secrecy. I couldn't tell anyone." A heavy silence fell over them. Ron's shoulders slumped in realization, and Ginny's cheeks glowed as she replayed Harry's hidden memories. Even here, on the surface of the moon, old mysteries followed them, reminding them how little they truly knew. "No, that's not it," Ron protested. Harry hesitated, then pressed on. "Do you remember the first time I joined Roger's Quidditch training? I complained about all his theoretical lectures, and you said he was hopeless." Ron scrunched his face. "Hold on. What moment are we talking about?" "At the very start of the session." "You were pretending to be asleep then." "No, at noon we were both in the common room being interviewed by other students," Ron insisted. "How could you be in two places at once?" He closed his eyes, replaying the day. "Let's see, at 10 o'clock you were in the dormitory. By 1:30 you'd just vanished." Even if Ron discounted the hour Harry supposedly spent in Atlantis, it still meant Harry had crossed continents in less than 60 minutes. Hogwarts lay in the Scottish Highlands, thousands of miles from the Bermuda Triangle off Florida's coast. Harry met his friend's incredulous stare. "I use the Poseidon staff," he said quietly. "It's an heirloom in my family, the Ryans. It lets you travel through one body of water and emerge from another." Ron's eyes went wide. Through water? He couldn't help picturing Aunt Muriel's grand indoor pool. He remembered a time when he'd been innocent and she'd been enchanting, so very different from now, just as Dudley had once been before everything changed. If only he'd had that scepter back then. Maybe. Ron's daydream shattered as a sudden lurch seized him. It felt as though a hook had snagged the small of his back and yanked him off the ground. One moment he was standing in the milk churn by the kitchen door. The next he was hurtling upward. "It's a portkey," Ginny called out calmly. Ron blinked as the kitchen vanished in a blur. A portkey? Uncle Alastair used to make them, secretly, like Fred and George tinkered with their shortcuts. He fashioned a handful so he could pop back home whenever he liked, Ginny explained. Ron's bewilderment turned to competitive pride. "Well, that's clever, but portkeys are practically obsolete now. We've got the portalcaster from Skywalker Alchemy Workshop. It's so much smoother." Harry shot Ron a knowing look. "Actually, this is just a standard deliveries channel." Ron's triumphant grin froze on his face. He might have bragged prematurely, but there was no turning back now. Chapter 150, Return Operation. Chapter 374, Operation Backtrace. In a swath of sky so remote that neither satellites nor wizarding magic could reach it, black metal plates drifted unseen. Whenever one of these plates aligned perfectly, a colossal block of unknown alloy would materialize atop it, then vanish as mysteriously as it had appeared. I feel like I'm going to be sick. How much longer? Ron's face had gone ashen. Thanks to Ryan's peculiar spell, he was phased into a ghostly state, unable to vomit or cramp up, but that didn't stop his stomach from doing somersaults. It's all in the manual, Harry replied, scrolling through the enchanted pages that hovered before him. Ron swallowed hard. Yes, but how many plates do we have to jump through? Ginny peered over Harry's shoulder. 100, maybe? They'd read every word of the manual and found no firm answer. So they drifted on, slipping through one teleportation plate after another in a haze of weightlessness. Minutes bled into hours, time lost all meaning. Squeak! Finally, Ron felt his legs return to normal. He planted his feet on solid ground for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Curious, he reached out and watched his translucent hand pass straight through an empty plastic barrel. Look behind you, Harry urged in a tense whisper. They stepped into a transparent dome perched on the lunar surface. All around them lay gray-white rocks and cratered plains, and beyond those stretches of sterile terrain stretched an infinite nothingness, punctuated only by the vivid blue orb of Earth hanging in the black sky. That's Earth, Ginny whispered, awed. Our home? Ron murmured. Do you really think Ryan's magic could hide an entire colony up here? Harry gave him an encouraging look. I'm not saying I fully understand it, but Ryan's power is nothing like what we've seen before. Wizards have lived on the moon for centuries. Why not? Ron hesitated, doubt flickering across his face. To him, Ryan was simply an improbably handsome, mysterious friend, someone you might mention once and then forget. Harry placed a hand on his shoulder. You have to trust me. Ginny nodded. He's always at Luna's side. Sometimes I almost forget he exists. But when it comes to concealing himself, Ryan really is an expert. Let's check it out, Harry said. He pointed to a passageway on their left, sealed by a door of smooth, crimson-hued metal unlike anything they'd seen before. Do you think we can just walk through? Ron gingerly reached out and touched the door. Like a ghost, huh? Hey! Ginny darted forward, gently shoving his hand aside. Don't blind yourself playing with alien tech. Harry stepped toward the door, determination in his eyes. Stand back. Let's wait here. Harry lowered himself into the barrel. Yeah, there'll be wizards patrolling soon enough. We might as well rest and stay hidden until they pass by. All right, Ron agreed with a sigh, rubbing his right hand where it stung. Ginny, tapping her foot against the wooden slats, looked between them. Harry, tell us about Atlantis, she said, brow arching in boredom. Harry nodded and settled in. Okay. He described, as clearly as he could, the towering spires of coral, the echoing halls, and the glowing glyphs that danced along Atlantean walls. When he finished, Ginny leaned forward once more. Now, let's examine the magic that's affecting us. The three fell silent, glancing at their hands as if seeing them for the first time. Harry broke the hush. Isn't it strange? This enchantment makes us invisible and lets us pass through solid objects, yet we stay firmly planted on the ground. Instead of drifting around like real ghosts, Ron muttered, throat dry. He looked past the barrel at the vast, cratered landscape sprawling behind them. Harry shrugged, meeting his gaze. Magic obeys whoever wields it. You decide what it does. As long as you know a spell well enough, you can bend it to your will, Ron said, recalling a line from an ancestor's travel diary. He sat back, thoughtful. That's the real power of magic. Wait, speaking of floating, I just realized something. Ron stopped mid-jump and looked at Harry, eyebrows raised. Harry shot him an impatient glance. What now? We're on the moon, Ron said, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet. Gravity here is about 1/6 of Earth's. In theory, I should be able to leap 10 meters into the air. With that, he sprang up, only a few feet this time, but still far more than he could ever manage at Hogwarts. Harry folded his arms. That's not exactly news. It's basic physics. What is news, Ron countered, is why Ryan is back on Earth and wants us to do the same. And another thing, How did we wind up on that farm? Harry shrugged, looping an arm around Ginny's shoulders. I was about to ask you the same. How do you know it's a farm? Ron sat cross-legged in the soft lunar dust. Look at these pails of milk, he said, pointing to wooden buckets lined up near a rough-hewn fence. They're still warm, meaning they were just squeezed. And those vegetables, he indicated a neatly arranged crate, especially the Brussels sprouts. Look how fresh they are. Whoever's tending this place picked them not an hour ago. Ginny leaned into Harry's side and beamed up at him. Harry chuckled, brushing a strand of hair back from her forehead. I'm just observant. He turned back to Ron. Ryan gave us instructions, but he never told us how to return. Maybe getting home will be easy. Ron tapped his chin thoughtfully. Like that time you went to Atlantis. Snap your fingers, and next thing you know, you're standing in the entrance hall at Hogwarts. Harry grinned. Let's hope so. I'd rather be dodging Snape's detentions than counting moons tonight. Ginny tightened her grip on his hand. Well, wherever we end up, as long as we're together. Harry kissed her temple. We'll find a way back, farm or no farm. It's different this time. Ryan didn't come here. He's probably back on Earth, Harry replied, his gaze fixed on the pale blue sphere hanging in the void. Unbeknownst to most, Ryan was indeed on the moon, but not where they expected. He was sitting in the library carved out of an ancient crater, its exterior resembling an upside-down cauldron. Inside, however, the ceiling blossomed into a perfect illusion of the starry sky above, a spell so intricate it mirrored the heavens outside. Ryan had bypassed the usual route through the farm. Instead, he used Harry and the others as his guiding beacons, instantly homing in on Moon City's hidden location. All the concealment enchantments woven by the city's greatest wizards were rendered useless against him. Because the tracking wards hung on Harry and his friends remained fully potent, unlike the diluted charms used when Moon City first opened its crude portal, Ryan needed only a moment to zero in. No ordinary wizard could span such a distance in an instant, but Ryan was different. He had mastered the art of fragmenting a single moment into many, spreading out the magical effort so that it never soared into the realm of the impossible. Moreover, Ryan's recovery mirrors the Ouroboros form of the perpetual motion machine. He restores his magic almost instantly during each brief rest. If you add up all those fragments of downtime, they total roughly a month. When Harry and the others finally return, Ryan will personally escort them back to Hogwarts. To keep them from noticing how much time has passed, he'll cast a temporal perception ward over them and temporarily share the Phoenix's immortality magic, suspending their need to eat, drink, or age. Once they're safely back in the castle, he'll withdraw the enchantment. Unlike Ryan, who neither tires nor grows old, Harry and the others would suffer from a month of suspended animation. Harry might fare better thanks to the immortality linked to his Horcrux bond with Riddle, but the rest definitely would not. This precaution ensures they emerge alert and unharmed, their minds and bodies intact. Chapter 151, Ordinary Moon City. It had begun only an hour ago, in the fading light of Shelby Farm's old barn, where Ryan stood debating the merits of opening a trade goods portal straight to Moon City. The air smelled of hay and candle smoke, and the circuits of magical energy humming through the room reflected in his furrowed brow. Should he subject himself to the tedium of paperwork and customs, or simply slip through an enchanted shipment channel, as he often did with less terrestrial destinations? Harry arrived then, skidding to a stop beside him. He'd been recalling Ron's recent expedition to Egypt, unearthing curses, dodging mummies, and it reminded him of the single most exhilarating journey of his life, the trip to Atlantis. Of course, none of that wild adventure would have been possible without Ryan's help, nor without that first portal swing which had ushered them to the lost city's sunken streets. "Think we ought to go now?" Harry asked, a spark in his eyes. He glanced toward Ron, who was leafing through a battered journal by lantern light, mumbling schematics of hieroglyphs and curses. Ron looked up, blinked once, then shrugged. "Why not? Beats another week of farm chores." Harry didn't need any further encouragement. "You heard him," he said to Ryan. "Let's do it." Ryan nodded. He led them to a stack of wooden crates tucked in a far corner, his private shipment of curiosities from Shelby Farm's suppliers in America. With practiced fingers, he traced sigils on each crate, wards of concealment to cloak them from prying eyes, protective charms against the moon's radiation flux, and a temporal lock to ensure the cargo couldn't drift off schedule. Finally, he carved glowing coordinates, latitude, longitude, altitude, into a polished silver orb and held it aloft. The orb pulsed once, then opened a rippling portal, its edges like liquid moonlight. Harry and Ron exchanged grins and stepped through first. Ryan followed, murmuring a chant to seal the gateway behind them. In a heartbeat of sensation, like falling yet floating, they emerged on the lunar surface. Ashen dust crunched beneath their boots, and the earth hung suspended in a black sky, impossibly blue and inviting. Harry drew a slow breath through his mask, awed by the silence. Ron's eyes darted across the horizon, searching for the fabled spires and domes of Moon City. But there was nothing. No jutting towers, no gleaming streets, only the barren plain stretching to a distant shimmer of hills. Ryan frowned. He waved his hand, fingertips glowing silver as he wove a broad-spectrum reveal spell. A pale mist rippled outward, scanning every ridge and crater. When the haze settled, the landscape remained unchanged. The city was nowhere to be found. He exhaled, frustration tightening his shoulders. "I know it's here," he muttered, voice muffled by his helmet. "I've read every chronicle, studied every trace of the Chronos ley line. Moon City is real, but hidden beyond any ordinary enchantment." Harry stepped closer, peering where the silver scan had passed. "Then we'll have to go deeper. Find the Master Ward and undo it." Ron cracked his knuckles, excitement lighting his face. "Moon City, here we come." Ryan nodded, rubbing his temples. The real challenge lay ahead, unraveling the city's concealment and proving that, even on the coldest surface in the sky, magic still held more secrets than any of them had yet imagined. Moon City, like the legendary Smith Castle, exists in a hidden realm, an independent pocket of space that overlaps our own world. Ryan flipped through the ancient grimoire in his hands, forcing his mind out of its drifting memories. The book was titled 100 Ways to Hide Yourself, its author listed as Lewin Heir, born in 1930. Within its pages lay the secrets of the concealment magic that shrouded Moon City. As he read, Ryan was struck by how closely these methods mirrored the Smith family's own cloaking spells. For generations, the Smiths had drawn on mystical energies gifted by their wizard ancestors, funneling that power into a lunar concept and binding it to their bloodline. With each successive heir, the family's personal aura grew ever fainter, so faint that ordinary observers simply could not perceive them. This near invisibility kept both the Smiths and their castle off the radar of prying eyes, even those of their own kin. Moon City's enchantments worked on a grander scale, but followed the same principle. Leveraging its location on the moon itself, the city was blanketed in a vast web of concealment magic. Every street, tower, and courtyard pulsed with hidden wards, ensuring that the entire settlement remained undetectable. In that moment, Ryan realized the truth. Though one lay hidden by lineage and the other by location, both Smith Castle and Moon City shared the same age-old art of vanishing from the world. The founders of Moon City went a step further with their concealment magic, weaving a version of the Fidelius charm into each of its residents, so that the city's location lay hidden within every individual. They also bound themselves by a magical contract, yet unlike Atlantis' covenant, this one did not require its signatories to relinquish their darker emotions. The architects of Moon City believed that every person and every wizard carries two faces, one bright, which brings order, and one shadowed, which kindles desire. Desire, they argued, is the engine of progress, giving order a purpose and propelling society forward. Ryan pressed his forehead against the cool glass and took in the scene below. In every respect, this place felt worlds apart from Atlantis. The inhabitants wore no unique lunar fashions, just ordinary wizarding robes and robes alike, and, aside from the elegant domes that crowned crater rims, Moon City could have passed for any conventional magical settlement. A small pang of disappointment fluttered in his chest. There were no wizards from distant star systems, no signs of interplanetary exchange. Instead of serving as a crossroads for extraterrestrial sorcery, Moon City was simply an extraordinary fusion of Muggle engineering and spellcraft. In almost every respect, social structure, daily routines, even lifestyle, Moon City closely resembles Earth's magical communities. The one major difference is that here Muggles and Squibs openly know about wizards. Magic isn't a secret. In Atlantis, every citizen trains exclusively in the arcane arts, but in Moon City, most wizards, Squibs, and Muggles set their sights on becoming scientists. To them, magic is simply a tool that accelerates or supplements research, an enabler of breakthroughs that conventional science alone can't yet achieve. Ryan found this atmosphere strangely uninspiring. After the vibrant camaraderie of Atlantis, Moon City's hyper-pragmatic fusion of science and sorcery felt dull. He glanced over at Harry and the others, searching for some spark of excitement. Nearby, Ned, the eccentric Muggle, shared Ryan's sense of tedium. Barred from casting spells himself, Ned had thrown himself into scientific work, mastering the cutting-edge technology used to manufacture magic props for non-wizards. Yet even that had become a grind. Every morning at precisely 10 a.m., he dutifully logged the raw materials he needed, filled out detailed requisition forms, and sent them off to the enchanted farms on Earth. Day after day, he dreamed of the day his research might finally break free of red tape and boredom once and for all. At 11 o'clock every morning, he began his routine at the Planetary Gate Key Management Center. First came the systematic check and repair of the gate keys. Once he confirmed that everything was functioning perfectly, he broadcast the all clear to the agricultural colonies on Earth. Then, he remained in the monitoring room, watching the feed as the supply pods outside the city deposited their building materials into the settlement's storage units. When the last pod finished unloading, he made his way to the warehouse he oversaw. There, he pulled a compact, one-handed arcane device from his belt, one of the standard models issued to every logistics tech. Nissian. With a flick of his wrist, it emitted a soft hum and began to absorb crates, barrels, and pallets from every corner of the vast chamber. Within minutes, the device had cleared the warehouse, automatically transferring its contents to the distribution department's transfer dock. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, his shift was over. Accounting for a quick lunch and a brief nap, he had logged barely 3 hours of actual labor. It was astounding. Some people here considered that a full workday. Once he subtracted time for dinner, afternoon tea, and a solid 12 hours of sleep, he was left with a mere 7 hours each day to dedicate to his research, and that was before factoring in any time for leisure or socializing. 7 hours of study, at most, in a 24-hour cycle. How could anyone hope to become a great scientist with so little time and such minimal exertion? Yet he persisted, driven by the conviction that breakthroughs seldom respected the boundaries of a typical work schedule. Ned's mind was frayed by the endless monotony of his work and the whispered doubts of those who thought he'd lost his grip on reality. He was certain the world was out to get him, and today, once again, it was time to trudge back to the warehouse and start the day's soul-killing routine. He reached the scarlet metal door, slid his hand over a small latch, and heard the soft click of its release. "The door's open, Ned," crackled Ron's voice through his earpiece, startling him out of a yawn. Ned turned as the massive door split cleanly in two. With an almost organic groan, the top and bottom halves peeled away, one sliding up, the other down, like jaws consuming the metal barrier. Beyond the opening stood a lone figure. Ned's shoulders sagged. The newcomer was wrapped in a plain black wizard's robe and held in his right hand not a wand, but something that looked suspiciously like a flashlight. Hardly the grand arrival he'd been dreading. It reminded Ned of the crackpot legends about Atlantis, or worse, moon colony mythos. Why did these supposed moon dwellers insist on dressing like medieval sorcerers? "Check him out, Ned." Ron's excitement crackled in his ear, but all Ned could manage was a weary shrug. The day, it seemed, was only just beginning. Buckets of milk, piles of vegetables, and crates of mysterious goods floated under the glow of the wizard's cylindrical device, each item shrinking until it vanished into the polished metal. "Don't be stunned just yet," Harry whispered, winking at Ron as he beckoned him forward. He and Ginny slipped out of the dome-shaped hut, the cool lunar dust crunching beneath their feet. "Ooh," Ron murmured, tiptoeing to keep up. Once he was sure the stranger in front of them hadn't noticed their arrival, he stuck out his tongue in playful defiance. Before them sprawled a breathtaking lunar city, interconnected domes gleaming in silvery light, winding corridors suspended under starlit arches, and slender spires that pierced the velvet sky. Ginny rubbed her eyes in disbelief. This is the city on the moon? Harry only smiled, as if he'd expected nothing less. Chapter 152. On the Road. Harry and Ron rounded a bend in the winding road and found themselves facing a sprawling complex of buildings that looked more like Muggle factories than anything they'd seen in the wizarding world. Smoke curled from low chimneys, and sleek metal walls reflected the pale afternoon sun. Clustered around the entrance were wizards in black robes, each standing casually on a skateboard that seemed to propel itself along the pavement. Some zoomed off in pairs, while others waited their turn, chatting or consulting floating holograms that flickered in midair. Ron raised an eyebrow. "Have you ever been here before?" Harry shrugged, his features unreadable. "No, it just reminds me of those factories I saw back at Grimwood Gate." Ron frowned. "Grimwood Gate's industrial district? You thought that looked like this?" Harry shook his head, a trace of disappointment in his voice. "Not exactly, only the layout, but still, it feels familiar." He glanced around again. "All right, so maybe there's a resemblance, but I've never actually set foot in this place." "Then where are we supposed to go?" Ron asked, eyeing the buildings with suspicion. "This doesn't look like a residential area." Harry pointed to a cluster of 3 skateboards propped against the curb, each connected by a thick, coiling cable to a small charging station. "Look over there. Those must be charging docks." "How do you use them?" Ron muttered, folding his arms. Before Harry could answer, Ron strode over to the nearest board and hopped on. He hesitated for just a moment, then focused. The skateboard hummed to life, its wheels spinning smoothly beneath him, and it glided forward at a gentle pace. Harry raised his eyebrows in surprise. "They're thought-controlled?" Ron grinned, hands in his pockets as the board carried him effortlessly. "Apparently so. No handles, no switches, just your own mind." Harry let out a low whistle. Neat. He glanced back at the factory buildings, now a few dozen feet away. "All right, then. Let's see where this ride takes us." With that, Harry stepped onto the closest charging dock, closed his eyes for an instant, and felt the faint tug of magic at his temples. The board lurched forward under his mind's direction, and together, the two friends rolled on toward whatever awaited them beyond the gates of this strange industrial enclave. Harry peered down at the board beneath his feet in astonishment. "The craziest part is, the moment we step on it, the skateboard turns completely invisible." "That's Ryan's magic for you," Ron replied with a grin, his eyes still fixed on the now transparent board. "It really is amazing." He nudged Harry. "Come on, let's go." Just then, the wizard who had opened their door moments before shook off his daze and stumbled outside, clearly bewildered by the sudden disappearance of 3 Hogwarts students, along with their silent, floating skateboard. "Guys, move it," Ginny called, tugging impatiently at Hermione's sleeve. Reluctantly, Harry, Ron, and Hermione hopped back on. With a gentle push, the invisible board shot forward, gliding over the smooth gray pavement as they sped away. On the other side of the street, poor Ned, the muggle who'd been fishing moments earlier, stood in stunned silence. His bicycle was gone. The main one, the spare, even the old rust bucket he kept in the shed, every last bike had simply vanished. Realizing he'd have to walk all the way to the materials distribution factory, he kicked at a loose pebble and muttered to himself, "So now I'm stuck working till 4 o'clock? Ridiculous." He shook his head in frustration. "I'm telling you, I'm quitting. 3 o'clock is late enough. Man, I'd even take a job that ends at 1 if I could." Grumbling under his breath, Ned set off on foot toward the factory, looming just down the road, while the 3 young wizards and witches disappeared around the corner on their magically invisible skateboard. Harry skated down the alleyway and shot past row after row of black-robed enchanters, their robes fluttering in his wah. "Key! Hurry up, you two!" "We!" Ron whooped, weaving between the wizards with reckless glee. Ginny and Harry struggled to keep pace behind him. "Wait, did you even notice our boards can phase through solid objects?" Harry called, glancing back at Ron, who was laughing as he drifted through a startled pedestrian. "Yeah," Ron gasped, finally coming to terms with what he'd just done. "That's kind of messed up, passing right through people." Ginny's cheeks flushed, but she kept her voice light. "It is odd, don't you think? She flicked her eyes toward Harry. When Ron turned to look, Ginny shot him a crooked, half-annoyed, half-amused grin. Okay, Ron grumbled, pushing off again. You two are hopeless. They glided on in silence for a few moments, the city walls rushing past. Eventually Ron slowed and rubbed his eyes. Hold on, where are we? Before them lay a vast, luminous metropolis, unlike anything they'd seen before. Silver towers arched into the sky, their surfaces etched with runes that glowed faintly under the pale moonlight. Crystalline bridges spanned canals that shimmered with starlight. Every building, every street lamp, every delicate archway seemed suffused with lunar magic. Ron's jaw dropped. All right, I get it now. This is Moon City. Harry smiled and inhaled deeply, feeling that same rush of wonder. Ginny reached out and squeezed his hand, sharing his excitement. Together, they floated forward into the enchanted streets, ready for whatever marvels awaited them under the moonlit sky. Isn't this just another ordinary wizarding village? Ron grumbled. It's not much different from Hogsmeade, he added, sounding bored. Having grown up immersed in magic, he saw only the familiar. The quaint shops carved into the crater walls held far less allure than the factory they'd just toured. Why don't we head back? That place was way more interesting. He turned to retrace his steps. Wait, Ron, look. Ginny pointed to a wooden sign propped against the cobblestones. It was arrow-shaped and painted with the words, Heir Library, 1 mile. Library? Ron's ears perked up. His mind instantly began racing. Find a rare spellbook, sneak it back to Hogwarts, earn praise from the professors, become a prefect, maybe even land a position at the Ministry of Magic, like his Aunt Muriel, a young, celebrated secretary in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Ron! Harry nudged him sharply. What are you staring at? Harry demanded. Ron blinked, wiping the corner of his mouth where he'd unconsciously started dribbling. Aunt Muriel. Nothing, he stammered, scrambling to sound casual. The three of them fell into step behind Ginny, the promise of the library lighting up Ron's face as they set off down the winding cobblestone lane. Ginny stopped in her tracks. I could have sworn I heard someone mention Aunt Muriel. She shot Ron an accusatory glance. Ron took a quick breath and turned to the others. We should get moving. Ryan might call us back any minute. With that, he strode off, and Harry and Ginny followed. They walked downhill until Ron paused beneath a wrought iron archway bearing the words Heir Library in looping script. So this is the place, he said softly. No wonder it's tied to Ilvermorny. Harry fell in beside Ginny, hoping to edge closer, but Ron's broad shoulders cut off any chance of intimacy. Clearing his throat, Harry ventured, What's Heir like on the inside? Ginny gave him a polite smile, but her attention was fixed on Ron's back. He, however, was busy inspecting the row of shops that flanked the street. The storefronts looked aged, dark wood beams, weathered stone, but the wares on display were unlike any he'd seen in Britain. Gleaming metal contraptions with polished gears and spools of shimmering wire mingled with brass fittings that could only have come from old Muggle automobiles. Some items reminded him of the spare parts his father tinkered with in his garage. Others matched sketches in that old Riddle manuscript. Yet here, every piece bore a faint, iridescent glow, a sure sign of enchantment. If Ron had visited Diagon Alley in the current day, he'd find many of the same devices, proving that British and American magic had sprung from the same source long ago. He studied the shop windows, curiosity brightening his eyes. What secrets did this American wizarding city hold, and how deep did its connection to Ilvermorny really run? Ahead, the library doors stood open, inviting and promising answers. Harry, Ginny, and Ron paused on a wide, dusty boulevard under the pale lunar sky. All around them, witches and wizards glided by on contraptions that looked part hoverboard, part spaceship. In the storefronts, each window more bizarre than the last, no one stood behind a counter to ring up customers. Ginny folded her arms, eyeing the leisurely passers-by. You know, she said, they're almost too idle. Don't they ever work? Harry studied the scene for a moment. Maybe they keep night hours and sleep during the day, he ventured. After all, on the moon, your day-night cycle must be completely different. Ginny nodded slowly. True, living here could throw anyone's internal clock out of whack. Ron blinked at Harry. Hold on, what did you just say? Harry repeated himself. Ron rubbed his temples. I've always thought Hogwarts was the best magic school on and off this planet. Harry let out a laugh. Well, Ilvermorny can boast Moon City. Ron's eyebrows shot up. What about Hogwarts? Harry beamed with pride. Don't forget Atlantis, he said. The legendary sages who built the underwater city all graduated from Hogwarts, and most of them were Ravenclaws. Chapter 153. The Hidden Monster. Ron Weasley was nothing if not emotional. Even Harry, who'd known him since their first year and was practically conjoined at the hip, couldn't always rein in his temper. Ginny, on the other hand, knew her brother inside and out, right down to the fact that he kept a photograph of Aunt Muriel tucked beneath his pillow. They were walking through the narrow lanes of a wizarding market, mulling over a particularly vexing clue, when Ron suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. His face registered that familiar flash of frustration, and Harry braced himself for an outburst. Ginny, spotting Ron's rising anxiety, leaned in and whispered coolly, Ilvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry was founded by descendants of Salazar Slytherin, one of Hogwarts' original 4 founders. The simple reminder hit Ron like a blast of cold water. He blinked, took a breath, and muttered, Merlin's chest hair, of course! Ilvermorny's practically Hogwarts' little cousin by bloodline. His shoulders relaxed, and a grin cracked across his face. Ginny stifled a giggle, covering Ron's mouth with her hand. Harry raised an eyebrow. What's up? He asked softly. Ron pointed ahead. Look there. Do you see it? Harry followed his finger to a small shop that resembled one of those magical creature emporiums back on Diagon Alley. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, empty. No shopkeeper, no hurrying assistants, just silence. Yet in the front window, amid dormant cages and silent jars, a single creature loomed. It was tall, covered in silver-white fur, and its eyes bore into them like molten silver. It's watching us, Harry whispered. Ginny moved closer to the glass, heart pounding. The beast tilted its head, its gaze never wavering. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Ron stepped forward, brow furrowed. Whatever that is, it's not supposed to be here, and it definitely isn't meant to be alone. Together, the 3 friends exchanged a determined look. They hadn't come this far to be spooked by a single creature, however unnerving its stare. With wand lights ignited, they pushed open the door, ready to uncover whatever secrets the quiet shop held, and to confront the hidden monster within. Harry skidded to a halt on his enchanted skateboard outside the dusty shop front. Pressed against the glass was a creature unlike any Muggle animal, leaner than a bear, yet bearing the same powerful limbs, its coat a shimmering silver white. It tilted its head, glaring at them with uncanny awareness. Ginny shot it a defiant middle finger. The creature responded by slamming its massive paw against the window. The crack of shattering glass rang through the empty street, sending a spray of fragments onto the sidewalk. That, Ron said in a low voice, stepping forward, is a Strangehide, one of the most dangerous magical creatures known, almost impossible to kill. Luckily, their offensive magic is feeble, otherwise no witch or wizard would dare travel alone. Harry vaulted off the skateboard. Really? They're that deadly? Ron nodded. Yes, and they share one striking feature with another rare beast, the invisibility stag. Both have that same silver-white fur. Ginny's brow furrowed. Invisibility stag? I've never heard of it. Ron shook his head. Me neither, not by that name. I've combed through every magical creature compendium I can find. There's no official record or even an illustration. If this isn't in our books, or anywhere else, it means these creatures have been hiding far longer than we realized. Harry absorbed the details in silence. This creature was a magical beast from the Far East, herbivorous, peaceful, and normally invisible. Its form was vaguely ape-like, clothed in long silver-white fur, and its most startling feature was a pair of deep blue eyes. Those eyes weren't just beautiful, they granted the beast a premonitory sense, warning it of danger long before threats arrived. Harry had learned all of this from the memory briefing Ryan had implanted in his mind. The name of the creature should already sound familiar. Back, in the early 1620s, a so-called hidden monster of enormous strength and size had ravaged the region. It kidnapped a young Pookie, later rescued and renamed William by the witch Iseult Sire, and slaughtered the parents of Chadwick and Weber Boot. Only the combined power of Iseult Sire and young William succeeded in subduing the beast. And subdue was the key word. Even with Iseult's formidable witchcraft and the magical talents of a Pookie, they could defeat the monster but not kill it. Harry sighed, closing his eyes to gather his thoughts. So that's what we're dealing with. Ron leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Okay, but what exactly can it do? Night had fallen over the castle grounds when Harry pressed his forehead against the cold window pane. Outside, crouched on the other side of the glass, was one of the most feared creatures in wizarding lore, the hidden monster. Its lithe body melted into the shadows, eyes gleaming like twin lanterns hungry for movement. Harry's heart thudded in his chest as he recalled everything he'd learned about it, and how close they were to its lair in the Forbidden Forest. It's strictly nocturnal, Harry murmured, turning to Ron. The hidden monster prowls the depths of the forest, preying on anything that walks upright. It can alter its shape at will, whatever it needs to blend in with its surroundings. A fallen log, a wall of brambles, even a cluster of rocks. You'll never spot it until it strikes. Ron's voice wavered with disbelief. So it's a shapeshifter? More than that. Harry's eyes never left the creature's outline. It can become completely invisible, too, just like the invisible beast we read about in Care of Magical Creatures. Only here's the kicker. Unlike that beast, whose hair we use for invisibility cloaks, the hidden monster is a far more deadly opponent. You can't outwit it, because it can dodge your spells in midair by shifting its form. And always remember, its favorite tactic is ambush. It attacks from outside your field of vision. Ron swallowed. No wonder invisibility cloaks don't use its hair. Too risky. Harry nodded grimly. Exactly. And if you thought the invisible beast was hard to find, this one makes it look like a street urchin. He rapped sharply on the window with his knuckles. The glass vibrated. In the dim light, the hidden monster's head snapped around. It bared rows of jagged teeth in a silent growl that echoed through the night. Ron jumped back, nearly tripping over a chair. Harry held his ground, every muscle tense. The creature's eyes locked onto him, as if weighing the cost of giving chase. Somewhere deep in the dark, the wind stirred, and the real hunt began. What on earth does this have to do with the invisible beast? Ron blurted, his face paling. What does he and that thing have in common? Harry leaned back, folding his arms. Let me explain. It all starts with Phineas Fletcher, Harry began, his voice low. He was a notorious smuggler of forbidden artifacts and creatures. Fletcher got his hands on an invisible beast. Legend has it, he planned to ship it across the Atlantic to the New World and produce a cloak of perfect invisibility. But the creature didn't stay confined. During the voyage, it broke free and encountered a stowaway ghoul hidden in the cargo hold. The two mated, producing hybrid offspring that fled into the forests of Massachusetts when the ship docked. Rumor says those half-ghouls, half-invisible beasts still roam those woods in surprising numbers. He waved a hand dismissively. Now you might think ghouls and invisible beasts are dangerous. Far from it. Both species are remarkably placid, more curious than violent. Ron's brow furrowed. Then, what about the hidden monster you mentioned? If these hybrids aren't a threat, why all the fuss? Harry's grin turned a shade more serious. That, he said, is a tale for another night. A hush fell over the courtyard as the wind rustled the leaves overhead, carrying with it the promise of secrets yet to be revealed. Phineas Fletch is a brute who takes particular pleasure in tormenting the creatures under his charge. All the original parents of the hidden monster, the ghouls, the invisible beasts, were abused by Fletch, Harry explained with a sigh. It only makes sense that their offspring would grow up harboring a deep hatred of wizards. Ron looked puzzled. How do you know that? Ryan's instruction manual, Harry replied. It's got everything. The founding of Ilvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, how Iseult and William Pookie met, the story of their adopted sons, Chadwick and Boot, and every link to the hidden monster. You'd know that too if you'd read it. Ron scratched the back of his head. I've tried, mate, but there's just too much in that thing. Harry grinned. Imagine if we could download all 7 years of coursework straight into our brains, just like that manual does. No more lugging books around. Ron's eyes lit up at the thought. Then I'd actually have time to finish my masterpiece while I'm still at school. Who knows, by the time I graduate, I might even be a famous writer, on par with Skywalker. Shut up, Ron, Ginny snapped, feeling completely sidelined and like a third wheel. We still have to go to the library. Chapter 378, Ryan's Recommendation. Okay, Ron said, rubbing the cold window pane. But there has to be some magic here. Look, Ginny urged. That invisible creature never showed itself before us. Ron paused, hand still on the glass, his curiosity evident. Had Ginny not grabbed his sleeve, he might have stood there all day, maybe even tried to break in. A hidden beast in a window, he muttered, and they say there's a thunderbird inside. A few corridors away, Ryan crouched between the tall oak shelves of the library, eyes narrowed behind his book. He hadn't expected any creature to sense the secret enchantment he'd slipped on to Harry and the others, an off-the-cuff spell he'd woven just before their lunar landing. Wizarding intuition, he realized, could be as fallible as any Muggle radar. No wizard could possibly track Harry's group, Ryan thought, closing his book with a soft snap. But this invisible monster isn't a wizard. He wasn't startled, though. In the original timeline, the British Ministry of Magic had already classified such hidden beasts as Category XXX, exceedingly dangerous, requiring specialist knowledge and the highest level of wizarding skill to confront. Yet here was proof, a creature capable of perceiving enchantments no ordinary wizard could detect. Leaning back, Ryan weighed his options. If this beast could see through his protective spells, it might prove invaluable or extraordinarily perilous to whoever tried to capture it. And perhaps, just perhaps, he knew the perfect person to recommend for the job. Phoenixes are officially ranked as a Category 4X beast, but that's only because their offensive power is judged to be low. In reality, magical creatures possess abilities far beyond even the most gifted witches and wizards. Take the Phoenix's immortality, for example, or the uncanny stealth of hidden beasts, powers no wizarding spell can touch. Even the humble Niffler, classed as a Category XX creature, supposedly manageable by capable wizards, once survived a showdown with Gellert Grindelwald himself, rumored to be part demigod. Ryan's mind raced. If he couldn't rely on a Patronus, perhaps he could imitate a magical creature's gifts instead. After all, legend held that many of these beasts had once been human wizards who lost control of their magic and their reason, abandoning that omnipotent power in favor of a new, unified existence. If they could do it, why couldn't he? Ryan, Ron's voice cut through his thoughts. Startled, Ryan looked up to find Ron and the others staring at him in disbelief. "Oh, there you are," he said, flicking his wand. Immediately, Ron and the rest shifted from their translucent, that ghost-like forms back into solid flesh and blood. Ron rubbed his neck, blinking rapidly. He'd almost forgotten how to breathe. Restoring the ability to breathe freely and to open and close our mouths at will felt strangely unsettling. Ron looked particularly ill at ease. Unlike Harry and Ginny, he'd never trained himself to hold his breath on command, so this sudden shift in physiology was catching him off guard. After a few tentative gulps of air, he leaned toward Harry and whispered, "We won't get caught, will we?" Harry offered a reassuring grin. "Don't worry. Right now, we're basically invisible, just like Ryan always is. No one will notice us." He sounded perfectly confident. After all, he'd tested this trick more times than he could count. Ginny flushed a deep crimson, her gaze darting away. She couldn't stop replaying that morning in the dormitory, lying under the invisibility cloak, tangled up in Harry's arms, stealing a few extra minutes of sleep. Nothing untoward had happened, just a warm embrace, but the thought of someone else possibly watching had left her mortified. She glanced at me, then back at Harry. "So you really were here this morning?" Harry's brow shot up in surprise. "Ryan, you weren't actually there when we woke up, were you?" I let a faint smile tug at the corner of my mouth. Ever since they'd heard tales of my training, from Snape's ruthless vampire experiments to my mother's instruction in the art of creating vampire brides, none of them were quite sure what to expect from me. "Maybe," I said softly, eyes glittering, "you should just pretend I wasn't." Harry forced a smile, trying to shrug off the unease that came with nearly exposing his magic to some unseen creature in the depths. "Aren't you going to read?" he asked, gesturing toward the stack of books in front of them. Ryan glanced at his watch. "It's already 4 o'clock. I need to get back before dinner, and I don't know when we'll have time to come here again." "Harry knows this better than anyone," Ron added with a grin. Harry nodded in agreement. He still remembered begging Ryan after their last trip to Atlantis, how he'd pleaded and pleaded, only to be firmly refused each time. 4 o'clock already?" Ron frowned, rubbing his belly. He realized he'd skipped lunch. Under normal circumstances, he'd be lightheaded by now, but today's adventures had left him strangely invigorated. That's because my magic isn't that simple, Harry explained. It can even suppress hunger. Ryan gave him a crooked grin. Better remove that enchantment soon, otherwise you might just turn into a real ghost. He watched as Ron's complexion drained of color. You're joking, right? Ron panted, sweat beading on his forehead. Maybe, Ryan shrugged, but if you're worried, you've still got an hour and 55 minutes before dinner. With that, he slipped his wand away and led the way out of the hidden chamber, leaving Harry and Ron to gather their things and their wits before the journey back. Harry grabbed Ginny's arm just as she was about to dash off toward the library shelves. Wait, he said. Ryan, do you have any book recommendations? Something appropriate for us that we can't get on Earth? Ryan smiled. Smart choice. He raised a hand and spoke the title clearly. Take a look at this one. How to Forge a Strong Heart. Almost instantly, a tome that looked startlingly like a living, beating heart materialized in his palm. The flesh-toned cover throbbed rhythmically, as if alive. Harry leaned in, equally fascinated and a little repulsed. It actually beats? Exactly, Ryan said. This book teaches you to channel the magic stored in your own heart. It also reveals the secret of James Stewart, the muggle who's managed to keep himself healthy for over a century. Harry pursed his lips in appreciation and accepted the strange volume. Then Ginny, eyes shining with curiosity, piped up, And what about me? Ryan flicked his gaze toward her. For you, the Book of the Bat. It catalogues every enchantment wizards have ever placed on bats. Ginny raised an eyebrow. You'll find the variant that suits you best, Ryan continued. You're already proficient with bat spells. This will show you how to summon a winged creature as an offensive ally. As he spoke, Ginny's confident smile wavered. She cringed when a colossal bat screeched into view, wings beating the air in great strokes. With a final flap, it folded in on itself and solidified into a pitch-black volume bound in what looked disturbingly like bat hide. Ginny took a hesitant step back. What do I do with this? Ryan grinned. Enjoy your reading. With that, the three of them stood amid the quiet of the library, each clutching a book that pulsed with more magic and more danger than any ordinary text could ever hold. I don't know everything. I only know what I know, Ryan said with a sly smile. Ron hesitated, glancing at the slim volume Ryan held out. Right, and I'm supposed to read. The magic of emotions, wasn't it? Ryan chuckled. It's not about manipulating other people's feelings. Instead, it teaches you how to channel your own raw emotions into your magic to produce unexpected effects. He waved his hand, and a plainly bound book drifted into Ron's hands, perfect for someone who acts on impulse. Ron blinked at its unremarkable cover. Why is mine so ordinary? I'm not impulsive, he muttered, though his curiosity won out. He opened the book and began to read. Moments later, his face brightened. Actually, this is excellent. Definitely Ravenclaw material. Ryan surveyed the three of them, Ron, Harry, and Hermione, absorbed in their reading. Harry had already summoned a stack of parchment, the words and diagrams leaping off the book's pages to rearrange themselves on the sheets like living creatures. Since the sorting ceremony, they'd all caught the spirit of their new house. In their old lives, none of them would have sat patiently, devouring arcane texts like these. Now, however, they were every bit the Ravenclaws Ryan knew they could be. Harry still hasn't mastered the art of duplicating books. I'd like to thank my classmates for their monthly tickets, recommendations, and subscriptions. Chapter 155, Dumbledore's Loss of Control. While Harry and his two companions pored over the ancient magic tome, a lone wizard suddenly materialized on the uneven cobbles of Knockturn Alley. From the moment he appeared, it was clear he didn't belong. He stood tall and gaunt, with a narrow chin and large yellowed teeth framing a short, white goatee whose ends curled like tiny spirals. His cropped white hair did nothing to soften the sharp indifference in his piercing eyes. They glinted coldly, as if measuring everyone around him. Even the lavish silver fur cloak draped over his shoulders, so out of place amid the alley's yew-drab cloaks and dusty robes, couldn't disguise the chill that emanated from him. No sooner had he arrived than the nearby shops slammed their shutters shut. Ragged wizards, Those grim, downtrodden figures who sometimes haunted these streets by day slid back into shadowy doorways. A handful edged forward, hoping to surround the newcomer, but before they could close in, a distant bell tolled. At the sound, every dark figure melted away, disappearing as abruptly as a receding tide. From a narrow side passage, another man emerged. His back was bent, his hair slicked and gleaming, and he scanned the deserted alley with wary eyes. Meanwhile, hidden just out of sight, a third wizard, his hair an unruly mass of ginger, crouched with legs braced, as if he'd uncovered some crucial secret. Then, in the blink of an eye, he too vanished in a soft crackle of magic, leaving only the echo of their arrival behind. Igor Karkaroff's laughter tinkled like broken glass in the cramped back room of the crooked shop. "So, Borgin," he drawled, his goatee twitching, "when did you get crowned king of Nocturne Alley?" "Not so long ago, you were rotting in Azkaban as a Death Eater. Then you reappear, grab the headmaster's chair at Durmstrang, and now you run this little black market empire?" Borgin's hunchback stiffened. He wore fine robes and expensive rings, silent proof of how far he'd climbed since wresting control of the illicit end of the Skywalker alchemy workshop. Rumors of dangerous dark wizards vanishing without a trace had only solidified his authority. Karkaroff leaned in, eyes glittering. A former Death Eater turned foreign schoolmaster. What a turnaround. And let's not forget who sent Minister Fudge dancing through his own garden in the buff. Burke, Borgin's equally shrewd partner, snapped back. "Why don't you stick to Germany and mind your Durmstrang affairs, Igor?" "This," Karkaroff said, sweeping an arm across the dingy room, "is my turf now. Don't waste my time." He paused, then added with a dark chuckle, "I'm pulling in 10 million galleons every minute." Borgin and Burke exchanged annoyed glances. "Keep dreaming," Borgin hissed, and the two shopkeepers turned back to their ledgers, as if to prove he wouldn't. 10 million copper nuts. Karkaroff's lips curled into a sneer. "Borgin, let me remind you, the headmastership of Durmstrang is not something I'm about to hand over." Borgin trembled, nearly toppling out of his chair. "But you claimed to run Nocturne Alley. Very well. In that case, I pledge my loyalty to the great Dark Lord." A sudden crackle of magic cut him off. "The Dark Lord? Karkaroff, why on earth didn't you mention this before?" A low, familiar voice drifted from the shadows. "Has Voldemort forgiven your betrayal?" Severus Snape stepped forward, wand at the ready. Karkaroff forced an uneasy bow. "Professor? And you, Albus?" Borgin let out a strangled whimper. "May I go now?" His voice was barely audible as he backed toward the door, eyes darting at the dozen wands leveled in his direction. With a final, fearful glance, he bolted back into his shop and slammed the door shut. Alone once more, Karkaroff turned to face Dumbledore and Snape. His eyes were glassy, but he managed to lift his chin. "Severus, Voldemort hardly deserves the title Dark Lord." Dumbledore's eyes twinkled behind his half-moon spectacles. "Oh, and who, in your opinion, is more deserving?" When Mungdens burst into the room, breathless with news, Dumbledore braced himself. His first thought was Voldemort. Surely Karkaroff was nothing more than another pawn under the Dark Lord's sway. After all, Voldemort had claimed not long ago that he sought peace, and Karkaroff's sudden resurgence could hardly be unrelated. But what truly unnerved Dumbledore was the Death Eater's composure. There stood Karkaroff, confronting him, Severus Snape, his former colleague, and Alastor Moody, the Auror responsible for sending him to Azkaban, yet he remained disconcertingly calm. This unflappable serenity was entirely out of character. Even at the height of his power, Karkaroff had never faced his accusers with such confidence. It was clear that some force bolstered him, someone with enough influence to challenge even them, someone whose ideology had reshaped Karkaroff's convictions. In Dumbledore's mind, only two names fit that description, the young Tom Riddle and that other person. But that person would never reveal themselves. Absolutely not. He dared to wonder, could it be the so-called lunar wizards? At the thought, a thrill ran through him, and he realized with mild surprise that a faint smile had tugged at the corners of his mouth, unnoticed by anyone else. From across the room, Karkaroff's rich, honeyed voice sounded almost tender as he asked, "Who else could it be? Who else is truly worthy? Who else could have done it?" Moody's magical eye bored into Karkaroff as he rapped impatiently on his prosthetic leg. "If you want to avoid more unpleasantness, cut to the chase." Karkaroff swallowed hard but managed a respectful bow. "My master warned me that Dumbledore would show me no harm," he said, voice trembling yet earnest. Snape and Moody exchanged glances. This wasn't mere bluster. Karkaroff truly believed it. "You all know my master's name," he continued. Chest puffed out despite the shaking. "The entire wizarding world trembles at the mention of—" He paused, savoring the moment. "Gellert Grindelwald." Moody's one good eye widened. "By Merlin's beard." Dumbledore's calm composure cracked. His voice wavered as he replied, "That is impossible." He reached out, unconsciously brushing his fingertips along Karkaroff's sleeve. A faint tremor of magic pulsed beneath the fabric, Grindelwald's unmistakable signature. Before their fateful duel, Dumbledore and Grindelwald had sealed a blood pact that bound them together, a pact that had long since been broken, yet its residue still lingered. Though time and circumstance had driven them apart, their shared magic refused to be entirely severed, and now, in this moment, Dumbledore felt it flowing again, reconnecting him to an old, dangerous ally and enemy. Dumbledore felt it in his bones. Grindelwald's heart hadn't changed. A man like that, even defeated, should have languished in the cell he'd built for himself until the end of his days. Master said, "When you see Albus, tell him this. Karkaroff came for the invisibility cloak. It will be useful," Karkaroff declared, brimming with confidence. Dumbledore's eyes narrowed to slits. All at once, a tide of magic, vast as mountains, deep as oceans, shivered into silent pressure and hurtled toward Karkaroff. Karkaroff dropped to his knees. "It's true," he gasped. Around them, members of the Order of the Phoenix exchanged astonished looks. Why had Dumbledore lost his composure like this? In that moment, memories of last summer swept through Dumbledore's mind. His hushed conversations with Grindelwald about the Deathly Hallows. They planned to conquer the magical world with the Elder Wand, raise an infernal army of Inferi with the Resurrection Stone to subjugate the Muggle world, and to use the invisibility cloak to keep safe the one person who mattered most to Grindelwald, Ariana. He took a measured breath, and the crushing magical pressure eased. "Where is Gettler?" he asked, regaining his composure. "Durmstrang," Karkaroff panted. Chapter 380, Grindelwald's Gift. For any witch or wizard who has ever crossed paths with Gellert. Grindelwald, his name inspires more dread than even Lord Voldemort's. It isn't raw power that makes him so dangerous, but the force of his convictions and the perfection of his rhetoric. His ideas threaten to shatter the very foundations of the wizarding world, most perilously, the Statute of Secrecy, and his words have drawn countless followers to his cause. Few understand the true scope of his threat better than Alastor Moody, who lived through Grindelwald's reign of influence and saw its promise of upheaval with his own eyes. "Albus," Moody growled, planting his steel-shod artificial leg firmly on the marble floor. Every eye in the hallway turned to him, but he would not be cowed. "Be careful. This could all be a trap." Victor Karkaroff's face went a deep, livid red. He straightened his back until his throat bulged. "How dare you insinuate such things about my master with that?" He broke off, swallowing, and spat. "Filthy imagination of yours. You see, Moody, by the very name of Grindelwald, you find an excuse to accuse me." Moody's eyes narrowed, and he took a threatening step forward. "You can't possibly know what's happened here unless you—" Before he could finish, Albus Dumbledore lifted a hand, palm outward. His voice was low, yet carried the weight of unshakable certainty. "I saw enough, Alastor, and I trust my own observations more than any man's pride or fear." Karkaroff stiffened, his blistering glare locked on Dumbledore. Moody's mechanical eye whirred softly as he gauged the distance, ready for whatever might come next. In that silent instant, the old wounds Grindelwald had left on their lives crackled open again, and every man in the hall felt the chill of his enduring shadow. Igor Karkaroff stepped into the dim light of the leaky cauldron, his dark eyes fixed on Mad-Eye Moody. "My master instructed me to come directly to Diagon Alley," he announced, voice low but carrying, "and to declare publicly that we have found a permanent invisibility cloak." He cast a respectful nod toward Professor Dumbledore. "He said you would be waiting." Professor Dumbledore folded his hands over his robes. "Very well. Pray continue." Karkaroff paused, then raised a pale hand. "Before that, a gift from my master." From beneath his cloak, he produced a compact pouch whose iridescent scales flashed like a rainbow in the lantern glow. At once, all recognized the hide of the Australian white-eyed dragon, one of the rarest, most prized creatures in the world of magic. With a deliberate turn, Karkaroff inverted the bag and gave it a firm shake. There was a soft thump as something heavy struck the wooden floor, followed by others. A heap of bodies lay at their feet, limp, lifeless, and shockingly familiar. 2 of the corpses were bent and hunchbacked even in death. "The Carrows!" Severus Snape's voice was a harsh whisper. "Amicus and Alecto. I saw them at Voldemort's last gathering." He knelt, inspecting the other victims. William Stein, Jason Winston, Nuke Winter. Horror darkened his eyes as he recognized their faces, young wizards who had only recently left Hogwarts. Dumbledore stepped forward, voice gentle but firm. "Who are they, Karkaroff?" "They were my students," Karkaroff replied evenly. "Graduates of a few years past. My master discovered their new allegiance to Voldemort and pronounced judgment accordingly." A tense silence fell over the room. Finally, Dumbledore raised his gaze to meet Karkaroff's. "Very well. Now tell me about this cloak." "I didn't expect it to be them." Snape shook his head. "The master said this was all to keep his plan on track." Standing beside Dumbledore, Karkaroff hurried to explain. "He merely wanted to help you solve the issue. That's all." "By the way?" Dumbledore's voice held a note of suspicion. He knew Grindelwald had arranged everything in his own favor, but this maneuver was only complicating matters. These fresh-faced recruits, newly sworn to the Death Eaters, were now more eager and ever to resurrect Voldemort so they could prove themselves by slaying him. And they were nothing more than children, untested in real darkness. Dumbledore judged Grindelwald's methods far too severe for such novices. "Master, it's really for you," Karkaroff insisted, noting the deepening frown on Dumbledore's face. He pressed on. "All these young Death Eaters hail from prominent families. They reject your ideals, despise Muggles and Muggle-borns, and have been biding their time, waiting to eradicate anyone they deem unworthy of the gift of magic and every filthy Muggle." Dumbledore's expression grew colder, but Karkaroff was undeterred. "The Master believes that if you step in now, most of these youths can be dealt with discreetly. No lengthy trials, no scandal. Their reputations will remain intact, and then—" He broke off, realizing that Dumbledore's patience was wearing thin, and hurried to justify his master's intentions. Albus Dumbledore let out an exasperated sigh. "Those aren't the words Grindelwald instructed you to relay to me." Alistair Moody's mouth twisted into a crooked, unsettling grin. "Oh, he did better than that. If these little ingrates survive, in another 100 years our society will look exactly the same, and not in a good way." Igor Karkaroff ignored everyone but Dumbledore as he shifted his weight. To spare innocent lives, the master used legilimency on them. Believe me, they're far from admirable characters. Severus Snape bristled. "They're my students, Karkaroff. You have no right to speak of them that way." Karkaroff shrugged, casting a dismissive glance at the potions master. "Then perhaps, Severus, you failed to teach them properly. As both a professor and head of Slytherin, you know how to rally to a cause, but you've done nothing for the moral fiber of your house." Before the tension could boil over, Dumbledore raised a hand. "Gentlemen, let us continue this discussion in a more suitable location." He nodded toward the discreet doorway marked 13B at the end of Nocturne Alley, where Borgin and Burks's thuggish guards stood watch. "We arrived in haste. Now that we have our bearings, we shouldn't linger here." With that, the group slipped into the shadowy corridor behind the shop, the heavy door closing softly behind them as secrets and accusations awaited their verdict. None of them had expected so many corpses to appear so suddenly. Even if Voldemort had truly shown up, he wouldn't waste time lingering here under the guise of peace. "The decision is yours," Dumbledore said quietly. Karkaroff gave a stiff nod and bowed. With a flick of his wand, the bodies at their feet lifted and vanished back into the enchanted sack. Dumbledore led the way, Karkaroff following uneasily, and in a crackle of magic, they materialized at the edge of a sprawling manor. A startled white peacock squawked from a nearby hedge, its feathers ruffled by their arrival. From one of the upper windows, a tall, pale-haired man hurried down the stone path, his robes swishing with each step. "Professor Dumbledore!" Lucius Malfoy swept into a formal bow, his cold gray eyes flicking briefly to Karkaroff, who stood awkwardly at the edge of the group. Lucius, Dumbledore greeted, inclining his head. Do you bring news? Malfoy straightened, smoothing back his silken hair. I do. I have a message from Gellert Grindelwald. And from you, Albus. Before he could continue, Karkaroff shifted forward. If I might. Lucius cut him off with a curt nod toward the bag still slung at Karkaroff's side. With a silent command, the sack yawned open, and the corpses tumbled back onto the gravel drive, their limbs sprawling grotesquely in the moonlight. Lucius's lips curled into a grim line. We can't leave them here. Dumbledore's eyes crinkled with resolve. Then let us dispose of them properly before we proceed. Lucius Malfoy's face had drained of color. Standing before him were familiar faces, pure-blood families he counted as close allies. The bonds between purebloods ran deeper than most wizards realized. And yet he couldn't shake the thought that maybe Albus Dumbledore and Gellert Grindelwald had somehow allied. A gruesome show of force, killing the chicken to frighten the monkey, as he half-joked in his mind. Lucius, will you show us to a private room? We need to speak with Igor Karkaroff, Dumbledore said, his voice betraying a fatigue that went deeper than lack of sleep. He sighed again, rubbing his temples. Every revelation today had been more startling than the last. What had Grindelwald meant? Had he truly unearthed the Resurrection Stone? Could he, if he chose, bring Ariana back before his very eyes? And what of their plan to placate Voldemort only to dispose of him later? That scheme had fallen apart almost as soon as it was conceived. Yet one thing stood out. The upcoming Triwizard Tournament was Gunter Gettler's handiwork. To what end? Lucius forced himself to nod. Of course. Actually, Dumbledore added, you needn't worry about the bodies. The house elves will handle them. With that, Lucius squared his shoulders and led the way down the dimly lit corridor, every step echoing with unanswered questions. Chapter 157. Time is up. The Sayre library was hushed, its tall oaken shelves bathed in lamplight. Ryan stared at his parchment, then blinked and tapped his forehead with his fist. Oh no, not again. Harry, Quill paused mid-stroke, looked up from copying an ancient volume. What's the matter? Voldemort's dead. Again. Harry spun in his chair, scar throbbing, his eyes sharp. Again, Ryan nodded, frustration creasing his brow. I've been waking from the same dream every time he dies. I can't hide it from you. But why does it keep happening? Harry rose and paced between the stacks. Normally when Voldemort fell, Harry plunged into that odd, disorienting void, an aftershock that left him drained and half lost in magic's ebb. Tonight, though, he felt nothing. No pain, no haze, just the familiar beat of his heart. That's strange, Harry muttered, rubbing his temple. He glanced at Ron and Ginny, who sat absorbed in a hefty textbook, oblivious to the drama at hand. Ryan leaned forward, tapping the rolled parchment. I think your mental link to him weakens over distance. His death still registers in your mind, but the usual magical backlash is fading. Harry's eyes lit up. If distance severs that connection, what if we took him far enough away that none of his Horcrux protections hold? Say, the moon? Ryan slapped his open palm with a grin. Exactly. Deliver him to lunar ground, where Earth's magical field can't sustain his Horcruxes. Finish it once and for all. Harry pounded the table, rattling ink pots. We'll need special wards and magical breathing charms, but it's achievable. A one-way trip for the Dark Lord, and no escape. Ron and Ginny finally looked up at the crash. Harry strode over, excitement sparking in his eyes. Pack your things. We leave at dawn. Ryan allowed himself a satisfied smile. With magic this bold, time truly was up for Voldemort. Harry frowned. Even if you're a match for Ryan, I doubt you can face Voldemort in a straight fight. Ryan shrugged. Distance only weakens the signal between you and him. You might be on the moon, but you're still one of his Horcruxes. Harry blinked. What do you mean? A Horcrux just anchors part of his soul to ours. How would that survive cosmic distances? Ryan tapped his temple. Think of it not like a radio station and its broadcast, but as a bond of cause and effect. As long as even one Horcrux remains in this world, the main fragment of his soul can claw its way back to life. Harry's heart sank. He spread his hands, incredulous. So you're saying that no matter how far I go, as long as one Horcrux exists, Voldemort can return? Ryan gave a rueful smile. Exactly. No amount of running will sever that link. If you want him gone for good, you have to destroy every last Horcrux. How can we possibly do that? Harry shot a glance at Ron and Hermione, only to find them utterly absorbed in a dusty tome, their eyes glued to the pages as if possessed. They hadn't even heard a word. Harry sighed. Great, just great. He turned back to Ryan, steeling himself. Then let's get to work. In the cramped cabin of the Moon City shuttle, Ryan tossed aside Harry's incredulous stare. Don't look at me, he said coolly. This is just their instinct to become stronger. He gestured at the two ancient tomes laid out on the table. These books. Think of them like that first, head-over-heels moment you had with Ginny. Harry said nothing. He just blinked. Ryan grinned. Exactly. No reaction at all. You're already perfect. You just need to unlock your potential. Flipping open one of the dusty volumes, Ryan continued. Treat this book like a weightlifter treats his barbell. The more you lift, the stronger you become. Harry frowned. But you'll be obsessed with Ginny, sure, Ryan interrupted, but you won't get any thrill from something dead or lifeless. Harry forced a smile, trying to follow the twisty conversation. Then realization crashed into him. Wait, we're on the moon! He stumbled back, heart pounding. How can you sense what's happening on Earth? A flicker of amusement crossed Ryan's face. Suddenly, it made sense. If Ryan could monitor events back on Privet Drive, then every nasty rumor, like that absurd story about Harry being secretly married, could have come straight from Ryan himself. And that so-called Rita Skeeter too, Kate Lewinster? Harry suspected she was one of Ryan's recent conquests. He remembered the strange tension between them during the Atlantis expedition. Now the pieces clicked. Ryan had been pulling the strings, even from halfway across the solar system. Harry shook his head, fighting the urge to let his thoughts slip. He couldn't risk Ryan noticing anything. Kate, for her part, had already drawn her own conclusion. You're thinking something nasty about me, she said flatly. Ryan closed his eyes, fixing Harry with a deadpan stare. No. By the way, I was just wondering, if I fully mastered everything in that book you lent me, would I turn into a wizard killer, like that hidden monster we heard about? Harry waved his hand emphatically. He didn't dare probe Ryan's unusually keen perception, so he quickly shifted gears. Wizard killer? Hidden monster? Ryan opened his eyes and shrugged, feigning ignorance. Why are you even bringing this up? Harry forced a casual smile. Of course, Ryan had no idea. They'd only paused in front of that shop earlier to talk about the hidden monster. How could Ryan know what they'd discussed? They weren't a pack of peeping toms, even if Ryan liked to think of himself as a sensible young man straight out of the 21st century. Ordinary wizards are weak and fragile, Harry declared. Their spells are easy to dodge if you stay light on your feet. But this hidden creature, this so-called wizard killer, was born from invisible beasts and ghouls, driven by pure hatred of magic users. It constantly shifts its shape, so no spell can ever strike it, and by lurking in a target's blind spot, it swoops in before a wizard can even begin an incantation. He paused, staring at the others. If it isn't a wizard killer, then what else could it be? Once I've strengthened my body with the casting a strong heart technique and honed my reflexes, I might just be able to take on a wizard one-on-one, without any magic at all. Ryan couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Fresh to this world, he recognized the spark of a kindred strategist. Heroes, it seemed, often thought alike. Still, Harry went on, a note of awe in his voice, Iseult Sayre really outdid herself to devise something this powerful. Wait a second, Ron interrupted, stretching and blinking as consciousness fully returned to him. He'd always been the slowest to rouse, least gifted in raw talent and most prone to mood swings of the trio, but when he spoke, it carried weight. Isn't the author of this book actually her husband, James Stewart? Harry waved the little enchanted book so vigorously that its pages fluttered like startled birds. You must have remembered it wrong, he stammered. Ryan promised this book holds the secret to living healthily for over 100 years. Ron folded his arms, head tilted in skeptical curiosity. All right, Harry, what's in it, really? Harry swallowed and opened the tome to a page stained crimson. It turns out this isn't about simple health tonics at all. It's advanced body alteration magic, spells that literally rewrite your flesh from the inside out. Step by step, it dissects the structure of a dragon's heart and teaches you how to integrate that tissue into a human body. Ron's face went pale. Dragon? Heart? He sank into his chair, eyes widening. And why would anyone want that? Harry leaned in, voice dropping. Because it doesn't stop at your heart. It gives instructions for brewing a potion that completely replaces your blood. According to the author, once you've transformed yourself this way, you become unkillable? Ron interrupted, recoiling. Harry, that's horrific. I like being me. Harry frowned, closing the book with a decisive snap. You're right. Let's stick to the usual charms and potions, ones you can undo if they go wrong. Ron exhaled, relieved. Much better. And next time, Harry, maybe choose a book that doesn't want to turn me into a fire-breathing monster. Harry gave him a sheepish grin. Point taken. He tucked the enchanted volume back into his robes, where it continued to flutter, its secrets safely out of reach, for now. Well, Harry said with a satisfied grin, these were all devised by Iseult Sayre, so her husband could share a wizard's long life, stay perpetually healthy, and be protected from mischief spells, spells that, to muggles, are as dangerous as curses. At that exact moment, Ginny stirred awake. What were you talking about just now? She asked, blinking blearily. And why did you stop, right on cue? Because time's up, Ryan replied, pulling a pocket watch from his robe. The minute hand had just clicked over to 6 o'clock, the precise hour they'd agreed upon. Chapter 382, Ryan's Pocket Watch. As Ryan finished speaking, Harry and Ron suddenly found their eyes glued to the silver pocket watch in his hand. In an instant, its crystal face rippled like a whirlpool on still water, and with each silent click of the watch's hands, the world around them dissolved. When they opened their eyes again, they were back in their circular dormitory under the star and moon patterned ceiling. The deep blue carpet lay exactly where it had been, and the 7 four-poster beds stood in their usual places. Ryan sat calmly on his own bed, the pocket watch still open in his palm, and the time read precisely 6. Whew, Ron exhaled, sinking onto his mattress. That definitely wasn't a dream. It was a dream you gave us, Ron added, his voice rising. There's no way you apparated us all the way from the moon. No wizard, not even the gods, could manage that. Harry held up the parchment in his hand. It was covered from top to bottom with writing, the complete contents of the book, How to Forge a Strong Heart. Then how do you explain this? He asked, raising an eyebrow at Ryan. Ron blinked, rubbed his eyes, and stared at the parchment as if expecting the writing to vanish. Harry, however, was deep in thought. He studied the watch's face and the notes in his hand, searching for an answer. Exactly how had Ryan's peculiar timepiece whisked them home so effortlessly? In the half-light of Gryffindor Tower, Harry's eyes suddenly snapped open. I know why it's set for 6 o'clock, he blurted, yanking the golden pocket watch from his robe. This isn't any ordinary timepiece. It's a true magical artifact, like Poseidon's staff, or something even more powerful. He flipped it open, and the gears inside ticked with an almost otherworldly rhythm. While we were out at the farm, it conjured a temporal bubble around the dormitory. Time in that bubble stretches exactly from the moment we left until 6 this evening, when we come back through those doors. Stepping up to Ron, Harry pressed his advantage. Even though we've been physically elsewhere, the dorm has experienced a normal day. Its clocks have been running as usual. Ron stared, clearly baffled. Okay, but so what? Time transcends everything. Distance, space, even matter, Harry said, voice crackling with excitement. The instant this watch strikes 6, we'll snap right back here. He punched the air triumphantly. Across the room, Ryan fought back a laugh. Harry's schemes were half genius, half wild imagination, and entirely contagious. Seriously? Ron raised an eyebrow. Harry waved a dismissive hand. Sure. Besides, 6 o'clock just happens to be dinner time. Maybe the spell's keyed to meal times. Ron scratched the back of his head, and Ryan almost choked on a grin. Somehow, Ron's simple logic was making too much sense. Harry shook his head. Dinner time, my foot. Sirius told me the Ministry still keeps time turners that send you well into the past. So why couldn't a watch send you forward? He snapped the watch shut, confidence blazing in his eyes. If his theory was right, they were one chime away from pulling off the most spectacular bit of magical time travel any Hogwarts student had ever attempted. Harry swung around to face Ron, only to freeze when he caught sight of Ryan's triumphant smile. So you figured it out, Harry said, voice edged with irritation. He'd been certain Ryan intended to use the staff of Poseidon to open a water portal straight back to Earth. After all, The staff could materialize its wielder anywhere there was water. But I realized, Harry continued, running a hand through his hair, that even if you travel through water, the distance between Earth and the moon is just too vast. You can't bridge it in one leap. He braced himself for Ryan's rebuttal. Ryan's grin widened. Mortals, always so literal. He'd been counting on their narrow-mindedness. Wrong, he declared, his tone amused. We did use the Staff of Poseidon to get to Moon City, but when it came time to swap out props, I reached for my trusty pocket watch instead. Terry blinked. Your pocket watch? Exactly. Ryan's eyes sparkled with mischief. I mean, a little stagecraft never hurt anyone, right? Harry stood there, mouth agape, as Ryan basked in the moment. Fooling Harry had never felt so good. Go ahead, Ryan teased softly. Let that one sink in. Harry didn't realize he just offended Ryan again. Ryan was already spinning elaborate scenarios in her head. Is that so? Harry said, nodding earnestly. He took every word at face value. Ryan, meanwhile, couldn't help but wonder. If Harry were a woman, he'd probably have gotten her pregnant by now. Well then, dinner? Harry suggested, completely oblivious. Ryan shot him a sharp look. Harry, wait a moment. Across the Great Hall, so few students remained that Draco Malfoy had brazenly brought Pansy Parkinson to sit at the Ravenclaw table. He eyed Harry as he carved into his steak. Where did you two vanish to today? He demanded. Goyle and Crabbe had been missing all day, leaving Draco alternately thrilled and tormented by Pansy's company, and by Pansy alone. Ron, bound by that confounded contract, and still mum about their midnight excursion to the astronomy tower, was the first to answer. We were in the dormitory. Draco snorted. I went up there. Nobody was in your room. He plunged his fork into the meat as though driving it into Harry's chest. If only Draco knew Harry had been the only one left behind on their moon trip. Harry ground his teeth. It's Ron's fault, he snapped, glaring at his best friend. Ron waggled a finger at his own chest as if to say, not me. Draco leaned forward, curiosity flickering in his gray eyes. So I suppose you've heard about Ron's blind date? Harry added, fixing Draco with a meaningful stare. Pansy shifted in her seat, the tension crackling around the small, empty table as questions hung in the air. Ron lunged to clamp his hand over Harry's mouth, but Harry sidestepped effortlessly. I know exactly what I'm doing, he said coolly. Draco chuckled. Most of those enchanting ladies come from Slytherin, he remarked. Contrary to popular belief, handsome men and beautiful women are actually quite rare among pure-blood Slytherins. Crabbe and Goyle aren't anomalies. They, too, boast unbroken, pure-blood lineage and have inherited their ancestors' most obvious traits. A sturdy build passes down easily. It's advantageous for a man, but for a young woman, well, you can imagine Draco's raised eyebrow. Meanwhile, Ryan munched on sweet melon slices and sipped his milk with a pleased expression. He refused to add sugar or any other flavoring. He preferred it as close as possible to fresh, sterilized milk, the kind that still carries that faint, distinctive scent. He'd enjoyed it even before he found himself in this world, and he still savored every unadulterated sip. Ryan wrinkled his nose at the faintly fishy odor lingering in the corridor. No wonder Ron had always used trolls to mock Slytherin back in the original timeline, he thought. In this fanfic world, though, thanks to the actors cast as Malfoy and his circle, Slytherins had become the epitome of cold nobility. Tall, handsome men and flawless beauties. It's all just a prank by George and Fred, Harry said quietly. After they'd set it up, they skipped town, went off to Egypt with Percy, leaving Ron behind, Ginny added, leaning closer to Harry's side. So Ron hid out in the castle, hunting for any sign of his brothers, Harry continued in a mock-serious tone. He's trying to avoid the blind dates they arranged, and honestly, he doesn't believe they really went to Egypt. We're here just to keep him company. Ginny sighed. We've been off the grid so long that even if someone asked about us, they wouldn't find a trace. Draco cocked his head. You've been running around all day? Ron nodded, expression unreadable. Yes. They really had, skateboards underfoot, racing across the lunar surface, chasing down every rumored lead. The moon's silvery dust kicked up behind them as they skated on cratered paths and through abandoned outposts. Draco's eyes gleamed with admiration. That's incredible. He raised his hand in a thumbs up, a grin spreading across his face. Honestly, I wish I'd thought of it first. Draco suddenly looked up and said, By the way, after dinner, we'll be going over to Hagrid's hut. He has something important he wants to discuss with us. Chapter 159. Flashback. Ryan's eyes snapped open, sharp and focused like a hawk spotting its prey. The uncanny intuition granted by his fabled third eye, an ability most members of the Order of the Phoenix possess, all except Dumbledore, swept him back an hour in his mind, placing him squarely in the headmaster's office. "Albus, I believe you're making a grave mistake," Ryan said, voice steady. He echoed the exact words from Karkaroff's dossier. "I've canvassed every known gathering place for London's wizarding community, Delphina Column's shop, the winding paths of Diagon Alley and Nocturne Alley, the Fengia Wizarding Clothes Emporium, the Quidditch Museum, the Leaky Cauldron, St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, and even the Ministry of Magic headquarters." Severus Snape's pale face contorted with tension, muscles bunching in his jaw, spit flecking at the corners of his mouth, revealing the depth of his worry. "And none of it was done by magic," he spat. "You know full well how dangerous Gellert Grindelwald is, especially since the two of you were so close." Dumbledore raised a single, inquisitive eyebrow, choosing not to protest the sharpness of Snape's tone. After a thoughtful pause, he replied quietly, "Severus, I know him well." No further defense was offered, and for a moment the office fell into a heavy silence. "No, you don't," Snape snapped. "If you really know something, then tell me. Why did Grindelwald escape from Nurmengard?" Dumbledore asked quietly. Snape's dark eyes flicked with irritation. "And this so-called invisibility cloak you mentioned, Harry's revolting father has one too. He once showed it off. It's an heirloom from his grandfather." He began pacing, the greasy length of his hair whipping around him and his black robes trailing like bat wings. "A standard invisibility cloak wouldn't last this long, and you, of all people, gave it to Harry." Dumbledore raised his half-moon spectacles and regarded Snape with calm concern. "You're worried about Harry." Snape's lips pinched into a tight frown. "You're worried this will drag him into things." Dumbledore sighed and brushed a hand across his eyes. "No, Severus, Harry won't be harmed by this." He folded his hands, gathering his composure. "And neither will you." Snape halted mid-stride, expression as unyielding as ice. He stared at Dumbledore, wordless, disbelieving. But finally, something softened in his gaze. Dumbledore gave a small, reassuring smile. "Trust me on this." Dumbledore settled back in his high-backed chair, steepling his fingers as he addressed Snape's concerns. "Let me be absolutely clear. Gettler's mention of the invisibility cloak, relayed through Karkaroff, was simply a warning. He wanted me to understand that if he ever escapes Azkaban, I will have no choice but to accept his terms. It wasn't directed at Harry at all, so you can stop worrying about the boy's safety." Snape's dark eyes narrowed. "And what terms are those?" "An offer one cannot refuse. How terribly dramatic." "As headmaster of Hogwarts," Dumbledore replied mildly, "I assure you, nothing will happen to either you or Harry in the meantime. Gettler's negotiations won't begin until after next year's Triwizard Tournament, in which I'll be personally participating. So, if you'll pardon the expression, assume you and Potter will be perfectly safe until then." Snape's lip curled, and for a moment his expression was unreadable. Then he leaned forward. "An invitation I cannot refuse," he repeated. "And why shouldn't I? Why shouldn't we find that insulting?" Before Dumbledore could answer, a faint crackling sound came from the portrait of Phineas Nigellus Black on the far wall. The irritable former headmaster blinked awake, his pince-nez sliding down his hooked nose. "As Headmistress Rosmerta's portrait once reminded me," he snarled, tugging at his wispy goatee, "you Slytherins have no manners. Speaking to your superior so bluntly, absolutely disgraceful." Beside him, the rotund face of Fosco Florin stirred. His red nose twitched as he blinked at Snape. Why? The rude curiosity. The other portraits, however, remained in a deep slumber, their snores barely audible behind the conversation. Dumbledore gave a wry smile. "Severus, I meant no offense. Consider the matter settled. You and Harry are safe at Hogwarts, and Gettler's threat will remain theoretical until I return from the tournament. Now, if there's nothing else." Snape pressed his lips together, but made no further protest. With a curt nod, he leaned back, folding his arms as the portraits settled once more into quiet repose. "All we have is hope, a hope to save everything." Dumbledore tuned out the soft whispers of Phineas and Fusco in their gilded portraits. He rose from the chair, and for the first time, the familiar warmth in his smile faded. His pale blue eyes shone with a strange, unfathomable light. After a long, pregnant silence, he spoke again, his voice low and steady. "Send for Hagrid," he said, "and have him gather his friends. We need their counsel on this matter." A quiet voice from the shadows asked, "Would you like to learn Voldemort's current whereabouts?" Dumbledore glanced at Severus Snape. "By way of Harry, perhaps." Snape's expression grew taut. His ingrained vigilance for anything concerning Harry snapped to full alert. "He's likely had another dream," Snape replied. Dumbledore extended his right hand. In response, Fawkes, the regal phoenix, swooped down and lightly tapped the wizard's ear with its beak. A spark flared, and in the next heartbeat, both Dumbledore and the bird simply vanished. In the real world, Ryan bolted upright, blinking at the ceiling. A slow smile spread across his face. So it was true. Grindelwald was finally going to meet Dumbledore. The moment he'd waited centuries for. The titanic, cross-generational encounter between the greatest white wizard and the first Dark Lord was at hand. His heart raced with excitement. Should we start with Harry Potter and Hagrid's troubles, or dive straight into 100 years of stolen dreadful, black and white collide again? We could split ourselves and watch both at once, but that would ruin the whole ritual. Ryan was still wrestling with the choice when Ron came to the rescue. "Let's do it tomorrow," he said, flashing a knowing grin at Harry. He still had to sort through everything he'd learned in the magic of emotions before we left Moon City. Harry nodded wearily. "Yeah, we're all too wiped out." He pinched his thigh, wincing. "Blame Fred and George," he added. "Because finding them sapped all our energy," Ginny echoed, her cherubic cheeks drooping in exaggerated sorrow. The pouty, wide-eyed look, so adorably Western, was irresistible. Without thinking, Harry swept her into an affectionate hug. Ron glanced between them, briefly wondering if he should call off the charade of exhaustion. But his thirst for knowledge and the awkwardness of coming between Harry and Ginny kept him silent. Tomorrow, then. We'd savor both shows in proper order, with every bit of ceremony they deserved. "All right, let's call it a night." Draco glanced at Harry. "I'll write to Hagrid tomorrow, then." He sounded hesitant, but Pansy, seated at his side, gave his sleeve a gentle tug. She didn't mind that Draco had finally warmed to Harry and the others, so long as Hagrid, that great lumbering oaf in her eyes, wasn't part of their plans. Draco managed a small, crooked smile. "Okay, tomorrow." "After lunch," Harry added with a nod. As they made their way back toward the common room, Harry's heart skipped. He'd used Transfiguration to imprint his lecture notes onto that scrap of parchment, and if he didn't transfer them into his notebook soon, they'd vanish forever. The theory sections were straightforward enough, but the exact potion formula for the blood substitute and its brewing precautions were far too intricate to trust to memory alone. Unnoticed by the others, their silent companion Ryan slipped into the shadows once more. With another quiet gesture, he wove a memory charm over the trio, erasing any trace of his presence from their minds as he vanished into the corridor. Chapter 160, Determination. The sea churned under a leaden sky that swallowed the moon's pale light. Only the occasional crack of lightning pierced the darkness, illuminating the heaving waves for an instant before plunging them back into gloom. Each flash was followed by a thunderous roar, and the howling wind whipped the waters into a frenzy, as if announcing the world's end. Even the boldest mariners would steer clear of such a maelstrom. Yet, hidden within this tempest was an uncanny pocket of calm. There, the surface of the ocean lay as smooth and reflective as polished glass, broken only by occasional swells that betrayed its true nature. Upon this tranquil patch floated a great ship, its timbers gleaming in the sporadic moonlight. It looked like the skeleton of a vessel long submerged, now exhumed from the depths. Dim, misty lights flickered in its portholes, resembling the hollow eyes of a restless spirit. On the deck stood a lone figure, tall and spare. His face was weathered by years of hardship, but behind the furrows and scars shone a still youthful grace, proof that neither time nor suffering had been able to quench the fire of his determination. The streaks of gold woven through his white hair betrayed its original hue in youth. His narrow cheeks bore no trace of blood, lending him an almost otherworldly beauty. Yet nothing was as striking as his mismatched eyes. Clad in a slim black wizard's robe that billowed around him like a shadowy windbreaker, his very silhouette recalled the prow of a phantom ship. Anyone who caught sight of him would instinctively hold their breath. Despite his uncanny stillness, a faint, nostalgic smile tugged at his lips as if he were savoring a pleasant memory. His hands were clasped behind his back, his gaze distant. At first glance, he seemed more a wax statue than a living man. But then a blossom of flame flowers erupted behind him, and the triumphant cry of a phoenix rang out. He turned at once, a clear sign that he was very much alive. "Long time no see." A tall, slender figure emerged behind him, an elderly wizard in an ornate robe embroidered with stars and moons. At that same moment, a bird whose feathers glowed like summer maple leaves alighted on a nearby mast. "Albus," the black-robed wizard said, extending his right hand. "Long time no see." "What do you mean by that?" Dumbledore's voice wavered, but there was a spark of hope in his eyes. Grindelwald drew back his right hand, his own voice quivering. "I mean exactly what you think. Hope. Hope that everything can be saved. But you must prove you believe it." Out of sight, Dumbledore's left hand curled into a fist. Grindelwald, meanwhile, produced from his pocket a small skull, no larger than a human fist, attached to a slender, bone-like tube. It should have been impossible to fit such an object in that pocket, but there it was. He laid the skull gently on the wooden table between them and tapped it once with his wand. Instantly, the hollow eye sockets glowed with a soft, flickering light, as if candles burned inside. "Watch," Grindelwald instructed. He slipped the tube into his mouth and inhaled deeply. From his lips billowed a swirl of white smoke that curled upward, twining through the air. The mist thickened, coalescing into a living scene, a grand ship drifting across the inky surface of the Black Lake, its sails tattered yet proud. On deck stood a figure, a woman, her features at once familiar and impossible. Dumbledore staggered back, his breath catching in his throat, yet his eyes never left the ghostly tableau suspended before them. "Albus, can you make out who that boy is?" Grindelwald's voice cut through the dim chamber. Dumbledore studied the ghostly projection. "His features are too blurred," he admitted, frowning. "But he's unmistakably a Hogwarts student. We must hurry to where the resurrection stone is hidden before he finds it." Grindelwald shifted the image. "That way. Ariana. Don't speak her name." Dumbledore's reply was clipped, his usual composure cracking. Grindelwald froze. He had seen Dumbledore falter before, but never like this. So raw, so vulnerable. It struck him harder than any curse. Clearing his throat, Dumbledore pressed his hand to his forehead. I can't identify the boy." He searched his memory, as though dredging up a long-buried Christmas past when he'd urged a certain young man to accept the death of someone dear. But no, this wasn't Harry. The figure was too tall, too broad. A single year on, Harry could never have changed so dramatically. "Resurrection? A woman?" Dumbledore murmured, recalling Harry's own talk of bringing back the dead that same Christmas and thinking of Lily. Yet the vision didn't match. He turned back to Grindelwald, eyes serious. "And the woman you saw, did your prophecy show her clearly?" Gently, he clasped Grindelwald's hand, seeking confirmation in the other's steady grip. Albus Dumbledore's eyes never wavered from the swirling projection hovering in the air. Wisps of smoky light danced around a boy and a resurrected woman, each figure's features subtly warped, as though reality itself had been tugged out of shape. "I foresaw exactly this scene in my dream," Gellert Grindelwald murmured, conjuring a wooden chair beside Dumbledore with a flick of his wand. He settled into it, unfazed when Dumbledore reached out and took his hand. But their appearances, body shape, hair color, everything is inexplicably distorted. Dumbledore tapped his wand against the edge of the projection. The looping scene stuttered, then froze on the boy, who seemed to be speaking to someone beyond the screen. Dumbledore advanced the image frame by frame, scrutinizing the details. "Perhaps the resurrection stone is interfering with your third eye," Grindelwald proposed softly. Dumbledore's keen gaze fell on the boy's hand. A circle of metal gleamed on his finger. "Wait, this ring." He paused the replay. "Do you recognize it?" A thrill ran through Grindelwald's shoulders. He leaned forward, voice low with excitement. "I think I do. But I must be certain. I need to consult someone who understands the Gaunt family's history." "And who might that be?" Dumbledore asked, his brow knitting in question. Bob Ogden, Grindelwald said. He served in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. At the Ministry's request, he once retrieved a memory, one that could confirm both the location of the old Gaunt dwelling and whether this ring, set with the Resurrection Stone, belonged to them. Dumbledore released his grip on Grindelwald's hand and folded his arms. His expression darkened with concern. "If Ogden can help, so be it," he said at last, "but be mindful where this path may lead. The Gaunt's legacy is a perilous one." Grindelwald inclined his head, determination shining in his eyes as the spectral replay stilled before them, its secrets still waiting to be uncovered. Dumbledore knew the Gaunt family's old house was deeply warded by Voldemort's magic, and that the Ministry's records on Eldred Ogden's execution were fragmented at best. If he wished to discover the Gaunt's address, he had only two options: ask Tom Riddle, or track down Ogden himself. Yet he could not risk Riddle learning of the Resurrection Stone. It wasn't a matter of willful distrust, so much as safeguarding the stone's sanctity. It held the promise of Ariana's return, and with it, the chance to rebuild his bond with his brother, and even with Grindelwald. Ogden, however, might prove uncooperative. Dumbledore had already resolved to press his inquiries, using legilimency, and if necessary, the imperious curse. Grindelwald fell in beside him as he turned to go. "Do you need my help?" "No," Dumbledore replied, though his eyes lingered on the mast overhead. At that signal, Fawkes swooped down in a perfect circle, as if summoned by thought alone. In a flash of green firelight, Dumbledore vanished. Chapter 161, Ron's Slippery Foot. A jagged bolt of lightning split the night sky, illuminating the darkness for an instant. In a hidden dimension beyond mortal sight, a lone castle brooded amid roiling, leaden clouds. At its highest tower, in a grand chamber draped with heavy curtains, Ryan reclined on an opulent sofa. He lifted a delicate china cup of steaming black tea to his lips, his eyes fixed on the shifting interplay of light and shadow, dancing across the tranquil sea below. Behind him, a soft rustling broke the silence. A vast serpent, its emerald scales inscribed with ancient runes, slithered onto the phoenix-embroidered blanket that covered the sofa. Each undulation of its sinuous form carved a winding channel into the plush crimson fabric. The snake inched forward until its head came to rest lightly against Ryan's calves. In one graceful motion, it began to coil, spiraling upward around his legs and torso until it settled upon his shoulder. Its forked tongue flicked out, tasting the air near his cheek. Another crack of lightning illuminated the room, and as the light faded, the serpent vanished as if it had never been. In its place stood a woman robed in sheer, black wizard's cloth. The diaphanous fabric clung to her form, revealing the pale curve of her shoulders and the smooth line of her neck. She regarded Ryan with inscrutable eyes, the storm's distant thunder echoing her silent arrival. Nagini settled herself across Ryan's lap, her strikingly beautiful face brushing against his with almost primal abandon. Every now and then she trailed her tongue along his ear, as though savoring the moment like a coiled serpent. "Not yet, Nagini," Ryan rasped, his voice thick with desire, his hands roaming over her in quiet eagerness. At his soft command, Nagini stilled and laid her head gently against his shoulder. Ryan's gaze drifted toward the distant horizon. Before he could speak again, Dumbledore, standing aboard a shimmering ghost ship far off in the sea, vanished in a flash of light. Nagini's serpent heritage stirred. Her basilisk instincts told her that something profound had shifted in Ryan. He raised a hand, and at once the walls of the castle faded until all around them lay bare. Raging storms, crackling lightning, and waves towering like mountains. The two figures were engulfed in that elemental fury, their forms flickering between reality and vision. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of Ravenclaw Tower. Harry, already dressed, leaned over the edge of his four-poster bed. Beneath the quilt, its deep blue fabric embroidered with golden flames, an unmistakable bulge formed. "Ryan, wake up!" he called. He looked across the room but didn't notice that his mysterious roommate had slipped away during the night. To Harry, it simply seemed that Ryan had been sleeping soundly all along, even softly snoring under his cover. Ryan blinked blearily at Harry as if he'd only just woken up. "Morning," he croaked, squinting at Harry's hollow-eyed face and messy hair. Harry looked like he'd been up all night, dark circles under his eyes, tousled hair sticking out every which way. For a moment, Ryan wondered if Ginny had accidentally wandered into the boys' dorm and Ron was snoring so soundly he hadn't noticed her, or Harry, clambering into bed. Then Ryan spotted the small notebook and the stack of unopened packages on Harry's desk. He sat up straighter, curiosity replacing confusion. "What are these?" he asked, nodding at the parcels. Harry flipped open his notebook and pointed. "Didn't I leave you a note yesterday? I asked Sirius to pick up some potion ingredients overnight." He tore open the first package. "This," he said, holding up a long, bark-like strip, "is African tree snake skin." He tucked it carefully into a labeled jar. Next, he uncapped a vial filled with a glowing crimson liquid. "Salamander blood. Fresh. It's even better than last month's batch." Finally, he shook a third bottle so the pale amber liquid inside swirled. "And this is diluted scorpion secretion. Potent stuff, so handle with care." Ryan leaned forward, eyes bright. Potion brewing might not be his favorite pastime, but he had to admit, Harry was organized. Very organized. And after last term's mishaps, well, maybe this would go more smoothly than Ryan dared hope. He offered to help unpack and label everything, and Harry nodded with relief. Together, they lined up the ingredients on the desk, ready to begin their most ambitious potion yet. "Did I hear that right?" Ron, whom Harry had assumed was still asleep, peered out from beneath his orange and yellow quilt embroidered with the Chudley Cannon's crest. "What's going on?" Harry held up a corked test tube. Inside, a silvery white liquid shimmered like pale moonlight. "Unicorn blood." "That definitely counts," Ron said, blinking. Harry raised an eyebrow. "So you're telling me you used cleaning agent ingredients to brew a blood replacement potion?" Ron ran a hand through his hair. "Well, it wasn't detergent exactly. It's a Bendimian secretion, a magical acid so strong it could eat through a building's foundations. Dilute it just right, and it becomes a powerful cleaning solution." Harry let out a disbelieving yawn. "Potions ingredients can get pretty bizarre. In 7th year, we'll be working with even deadlier substances." Ron shook his head, impressed. "You didn't pull an all-nighter just to cram how to cast a strong heart into your head, did you?" Harry rubbed his side and winced. "I wasn't only studying." He fell silent, pressing a hand to his waist once more, the fatigue of the night's experiments finally catching up with him. It was a sealed chamber, bathed in shifting multicolored lights. The carpet was slick with mysterious fluids, and the floor was strewn with the bodies of ragged women, their tattered clothes soaked and unrecognizable. Torn stockings and scraps of fabric lay scattered in chaotic heaps. Harry sat on a battered sofa, every muscle coiled with tension. "I want to take down 10, he murmured, his voice low and fierce. He recognized that same relentless determination he'd carried in a past life, an indomitable resolve as potent as Harry Potter's. Beside him, Ron checked his watch. "Quidditch starts next Saturday. You know, the week after Christmas." Harry's eyes glinted. "Hufflepuff's our opponent. I'm confident in my role as Seeker, but they've got Dudley." Ron frowned. "Dudley? With his odd magic? He's tougher than anyone we've faced. If we're unprepared, we might not even score." Harry leaned forward, excitement coiling in his chest. A pre-match blood transfusion could tip the scales in our favor. His fingertips itched to proceed. Ryan, who'd been hovering at Harry's side, glanced downward, his gaze lingering over the bruises near Harry's kidneys. Ron noticed this, then shifted his attention to the row of bubbling potion vials on a nearby table. "Harry, you need to rest," Ron said, his tone firm. "It's still the holidays," Harry countered, brushing a stray lock of hair behind his ear. "We've got time." Ron moved to help Harry lie back on the bed, but his foot slid on a bottle of yellow-green liquid. With a startled yelp, he tumbled forward and crashed onto Harry in a thunderous thud. Chapter 1. Harry groaned and blinked awake, still half lost in a fog of sleep. Before he could fully orient himself, Ron yanked open his robe, tearing it free and exposing Harry's pale, slender chest to the bright morning sunlight. A sharp crash sounded from the doorway. Ginny stood there, stunned, her freshly baked apple pie soaring from her hands and shattering on the hardwood floor. Crimson fillings spread in sticky pools between the boards as she gaped at the scene before her. Sunlight danced over Harry's bare skin, picking out the faint sheen of sweat clinging to the fine, transparent down on his chest. Ron, cheeks flushed, knelt on the mattress and leaned over Harry, pinning him back against the pillow as though to steady himself. My foot slipped, Ron blurted, his voice unsteady. Ronald Weasley, what on earth are you doing? Ginny's voice trembled between outrage and dispel. IF. Both boys scrambled to their feet, faces burning. Ron opened his mouth, then shut it, finally murmuring, I'm sorry, Ginny. Harry ran a hand through his unruly hair. I must have nodded off again, he admitted, rubbing his eyes. At that moment, Ryan Weasley, Ginny and Ron's youngest brother, ambled into the room, still rubbing the sleep from his eyes. What's going on here? Ginny, still fuming, snatched up her broken pie plate. With a defiant roar, she spun on her heel and stormed off down the hallway, leaving Ron, Harry, and Ryan staring at the mess in stunned silence. Chapter 162, Portuguese Long-Nosed Dragon, Dismissed. A sharp wind whipped across Harry's cheeks like a blade. The sun hung faint and distant in the cobalt sky, offering no warmth as they made their way to Hagrid's hut. Ginny had dashed outside earlier, and before long Hedwig arrived, bearing a letter from Hagrid. He was inviting Harry and the others to breakfast, and to continue the conversation they'd started yesterday. Ginny had spent the morning unraveling the misunderstanding between her and Ron, but she still kept her distance. Every so often a cold breeze swept past them, echoing the chill in her demeanor. She clasped Harry's left hand tightly, holding him well away from Ron on her right. As she'd bluntly told him, until Ron found a girlfriend, she intended to maintain a respectable gap. Draco, walking just behind Ron, elbowed him in the ribs. What's up with you today? Ron mumbled. Nothing, Draco snorted. Nothing? Really? Ron shifted uncomfortably, stealing a glance at Ginny. Well, if you must know, this morning in the dormitory, Ginny saw Harry and me in an accident. Draco's eyes widened. An accident? Ron cleared his throat, cheeks flushing. Yeah, it was a misunderstanding, but Ginny shot Ron a cool look. Draco leaned forward, curiosity lighting his face. You've got to fill me in, Weasley. What really happened? Harry, sensing the tension, tightened his grip on Ginny's hand. The dusty path ahead led them straight into Hagrid's warm hut, but for the moment, all three of them were wrapped up in their own questions and the secrets they weren't quite ready to share. It's almost identical to that photo. What photo? Draco asked. Rita Skeeter's photo, Ron answered, but by then Harry and the others had already headed off. Hey, wait for us! They sprinted after their friends until the familiar silhouette of Hagrid's hut came into view. Inside, the comforting scent of something sizzling drifted through the single room. Hagrid stood by the stove, tongs in hand, turning fat sausages that popped and hissed in the pan. Come on in, you lot, he called, wiping his hands on his coat. You must be starving. Ron opened his mouth to comment, but a small spider, Alaspad, Hagrid's newest eight-legged companion, was busy leaping across a web in the corner, and Ron found himself frozen in place. Finally, he swallowed and said, Thanks, it smells great. Harry, already seated at the rough wooden table, popped a sausage into his mouth. This tastes a bit like chicken, he said around a mouthful. Ginny passed him a plate of chickpeas to go alongside it. Hagrid beamed. Ah, that'd be dragon meat, he announced proudly. Took me ages to work out the cooking method. Draco raised an eyebrow. Dragon meat, really? Reckon you'd never guess how easy it is, Hagrid went on. Just marinate the sausages in Bandaman secretion for 10 minutes, roast 'em up, and Bob's your uncle. Ron's face went green. Bandaman, he murmured. He'd grown up with those bizarre little creatures lurking beneath the boards, greenish fungus-like things with dozens of blinking eyes. The memory of them skittering under his floorboards made his stomach churn. Ginny noticed his discomfort and slipped him a bead of sausage. Just try it, she said with a grin. If wizarding families use them to marinate dragon meat, they can't be all bad. Ron glanced at the sausage, glanced at Alaspad, and then, reluctantly, took a bite. His eyes widened. It's not half bad, he admitted, if a little weakly. Hagrid whooped. Told you so now. Dig in. All at once, the little hut felt warm and full of laughter, the odd spider and strange secrets swallowed up by the simple joy of a shared meal. They come in swarms, burrowing into houses, feeding on filth, and if you leave them to their own devices, they'll reduce an entire home to rubble. The foul odor of decay lures them out, triggering the digestive juices they secrete. Hagrid's explanation made Ron push his plate away. He couldn't stomach another one of those usages. Ginny, Harry, and Draco, on the other hand, were utterly delighted. None of them had ever encountered Bandaman before, so the idea of meat cured with a monster's digestive enzymes felt exotic rather than repellent. From across the room, Ryan, nestled in the battered old armchair Hagrid had dragged in from the dormitory, licked his lips in anticipation. He'd never expected Hagrid to turn dragon meat into sausages like these, and he understood Ron's reaction all too well. It reminded him of some grotesque pickling process he'd once heard described, something about ancient brine and phlegm that stuck in his mind as an old wives' tale. At last, Harry popped the final sausage into his mouth. Ginny, perched beside him, gave him a soft napkin and tenderly wiped away the grease at the corners of his lips. The table fell quiet. Ron cleared his throat, glancing away from Harry. "Hagrid, do you have any questions for us?" "Professor Dumbledore suggested I get your thoughts on something." Hagrid shuffled his feet, his massive coat brushing the floor. He looked almost sheepish under Ron's expectant gaze. "Well," he rumbled, "there's this thing I've been meaning to ask you all about." And with that, Hagrid began. Professor Stone stood at the front of the Care of Magical Creatures classroom and unrolled a parchment stamped with the Ministry of Magic seal. "Next year, Hogwarts will be entering the Inter-School Magical Creature Tournament," he announced. "The Ministry has granted us permission to request 3 dragons from this shortlist: the Hebridean Black, the Peruvian Vipertooth, the Portuguese Long-Nosed, or the Hungarian Horntail." The moment he said Hebridean Black, Hagrid's massive frame stiffened, and his eyes glittered with excitement. "You're not planning to skip the Hebridean Black, are you?" "It's endemic to the Scottish Hebrides," Professor Stone replied evenly, "just off the coast of Hogwarts." Hagrid reached up to stroke his tangled beard, his dark, beetle-like eyes shining. "The McFasties have cared for those dragons for generations. We could easily request one in Hogwarts' name." Stone sighed. "I know, Hagrid, but for a competition, we should pick something rarer, something that will really impress the judges." At that, Draco Malfoy leaned forward, a self-satisfied smirk on his lips. "But just picture the Hebridean Black, scales as black as storm clouds, rugged and resilient to the touch, a row of shallow, razor-sharp ridges down its spine, a tail tipped like an arrowhead, leathery, bat-like wings, and best of all, those unforgettable purple eyes." Hagrid closed his eyes, as if picturing the dragon soaring over the misty aisles, its deep purple gaze fixed on him. The room fell silent while we all considered Draco's words and whether tradition or novelty should guide our choice. "What about the Peruvian Vipertooth?" someone asked. "They're so abundant we'd have to send additional dragon slayers," another committee member replied. "And they're the source of dragonpox," Draco Malfoy added, recalling how his own grandfather had died from the disease. He cast his decisive vote for the Peruvian Vipertooth. Hagrid shook his head. "But it's the smallest and fastest dragon recorded, barely 15 feet long, with sleek copper scales. We won't get a proper challenge out of that." Someone else piped up. "What about the Hungarian Horntail? Surely that's a worthy contender." "That one's far too dangerous," Hagrid warned. "It's the most vicious and aggressive breed of dragon we know." Draco covered his face with his right hand and sighed. "Its fire breath can reach up to 50 feet, he muttered. "I don't see what good it does to pit ourselves against a dragon that can roast us before we even get close." Harry Potter, listening to the debate, didn't need to hear any more. The flick of Hagrid's doe-eyed gaze and the swivel of the sorting vase had made the decision obvious. The Hungarian Horntail would be the tournament's dragon, and there was no arguing with that. The classroom was unusually still, all eyes fixed on the projection hovering above Hagrid's desk. The dragon they'd just witnessed in action had been spectacular. Jet-black scales that swallowed the light, a lizard-like head crowned with bronze horns, eyes like molten gold, and a spiked tail glinting copper. The beast's fiery breath had turned half the clearing into smoldering ash in seconds. Hagrid, usually unflappable, was practically vibrating with excitement. He pushed his massive beard aside and waved his great hands as if fanning a blaze. No, you can't rule it out." Harry exchanged a glance with Hermione. They both knew what Hagrid meant. But before Hermione could speak, Ron shot his hand up. "It's definitely a Portuguese long-nosed dragon," he announced, grinning as if he'd just won a Quidditch match. Draco Malfoy rolled his eyes so extravagantly the entire class noticed. He had already made his guess. He'd told Hagrid it was a Hungarian horntail, and the professor's repeated denials had grated on him. Now Ron swooped in with the right answer, and Draco couldn't resist a parting shot. "Not impossible," Hagrid admitted, scratching behind one ear. His broad shoulders shrugged sheepishly. "But I've never actually seen a living Portuguese long-nosed dragon, only museum mounts and taxidermy specimens." Draco leaned back, a smug smirk playing on his lips. "Then why do you hesitate?" he asked, voice dripping with mock concern. Hagrid's shy smile was almost boyish. "I'd hoped someone here could tell me more about its behavior in the wild," he confessed. He flicked a fond glance around the room. "I really admire how much you've all prepared for today." Draco snorted and rolled his eyes again, but the tension in the room broke with a ripple of laughter. Even Hagrid's booming laugh echoed warmly off the stone walls, and the lesson moved on, now brimming with new questions about the elusive Portuguese long-nosed dragon.